people to work more efficiently. It slashed the number of steps taken by the staff member who ensures orders are delivered promptly and accurately from about 18,000 per shift, or about 3.4 miles, to about 9,500.
So I guess my question is, being more efficient isn't what the Fed would be worried about. It's that if it doesn't work, or if it doesn't cut costs enough, does that mean we're going to have to wind up seeing layoffs?
Yeah.
Like, is that sort of the next feasible step at some point for companies that are really getting these margins squeezed?
I know, it's interesting. I mean, I learned about this whole ballet that happens in the kitchen from the TV show The Bear that I love.
I haven't seen that.
Because when they're actually building, constructing, designing this kitchen in the show, they literally mapped out where people work and how many steps they take to do from step 1 to step 2. And it really is, they map out every single step of the process to try to keep people, make people more efficient, I guess, so you don't run into each other.
Which is quite interesting.
Yeah, so pollo campero.
There you go. He's just showing me up now.
Chicken camper. That's what it means. I don't know. Go figure. Well, more coming up.
This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to go a little tech here to start it off with. Anurag Rana, Bloomberg Intelligence technology analyst. Apple explores robots as the next big thing after the car fizzles. I saw that headline. I'm like, I don't like headlines that say the next big thing. Because what happened to the last big thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. So anyway,
I'm with you on this.
Anurag will have a story on that. Plus, Jason Kelly, Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent, will discuss the latest episode of his new podcast entitled The Deal with Alex Rodriguez. Yes, that Alex Rodriguez, the baseball player, and Jason Kelly. They sit down every week and meet with some really cool people in the intersection of sports, entertainment, media. They've got a good one today, so we'll check in with Jason on that. But first, let's go to John Tucker and get a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, and this Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. Investors right now latching onto the data, the jobless claims topping estimates, so that helps make the case for the Federal Reserve to start lowering rates. And it does come ahead of tomorrow's jobs report. S&P 500 just about wiping out the weekly losses. You have 10 of the 11 major industry groups in the index. They are higher right now. Tech heavyweights leading the stocks. Treasuries right now, they appear to be wavering. The 2-year, that actually is just up right now. 1 basis point, 468. 10 unchanged at 433. In the meantime, Jean Vauvin at BlackRock says the Fed's approach right now can push stocks higher.
We think inflation is going to be showing progress towards 2 over the next few months. The Fed is data dependent. They're not forward looking, so they're going to be lured into we've solved inflation. That's going to be the story. That's part of the reason why we're kind of constructive on risk for now.
For the S&P 500, 34 points higher. That's up 0.7%. We're at 52.46. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 168 points. The Nasdaq 100 up 145 points. That's a rise of 0.8%. And shares of HubSpot right now, ticker symbol HUBS, they are up 8.2%. Apple talking about, Alphabet is talking with financial advisors about potentially making an offer for HubSpot. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
Thank you so much, John Tucker. We appreciate it. So I feel like we're kind of just waiting now. Yeah, is it jobs? Do you think tomorrow jobs is going to be a big mover?
It could be. It could be. I mean, but it's the narrative seems to be from Jay Powell yesterday. No, really, guys, we're committed to some rate cutting this year, and that's kind of what's lifted the market. But again, data dependent, so if the data does change.
There is that narrative, too, that maybe the economy can handle more job growth and a tighter, without the market being tight. More job growth without the market being tight. I mean, I wonder if we'll see and hear about that tomorrow. In the meantime, let's just get a check on how we're trading and what we're positioned like headed into Jobs Friday. Abigail Doolittle joins us now with more. Abigail, how is positioning right now coming into tomorrow?
I would say somewhat bullish. You know, you have to think, though, over the Monday and Tuesday, not so hot. And then yesterday and today, we're looking at gains for the S&P 500, up about 0.7% at this point. The NASDAQ 100 up a little bit more, up 0.8%. It's relatively broad-based, too, given the fact that you have the Russell 2000 up even more. So lots of participation in this rally. In terms of volume, I'm just checking that out right now. Let's see how serious investors are ahead of Jobs Day. And I would say that the other big print may be bigger than Jobs, unless Jobs is just surprising. We've been in this range of, around 200,000 jobs added each month, that Goldilocks range where it's not too much, not too little. CPI for the month of March, that comes out next Wednesday. The year over year is expected the survey is calling for up 3.5% versus the prior period of up 3.2%. Should that happen, I don't know if that's priced in or not. We, of course, have had yields moving sharply higher over the last month or so, suggesting that those bond investors are keen to the idea that maybe the Fed won't be cutting those 3 times that the Fed right now themselves are saying are on the table, or suggesting that. Stock investors are really with the Fed at this point, but it's going to be interesting to see what way it goes. And those, I would say that those inflation data are going to, it's going to be critically important.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing, I wonder if it is. It feels like a little bit of a divergence over the past couple of days, the bond and the stock market. I thought I would see rates pull back a little bit more on Powell's comments, but maybe that's just the bond market being a little bit smarter.
No, I think that they're taking it, it's interesting. So in 2022, when the Fed was very clearly telegraphing that that they were going to be hiking and hiking aggressively, stocks took it seriously, basically a correction / bear market. Bonds, not so much. And now the Fed, I would say the data is signaling that maybe we're going to see the Fed not be quite as aggressive in terms of cutting as the Fed themselves are saying it. The bond market really seems to be taking the data seriously. The stock market, not so much.
It's interesting. Ira Jersey was on earlier in the week and saying that we may have seen some short covering, say, in the bond market, so we haven't really seen maybe true directional positioning along that front. Again, can we go back to gold for a second? It just really makes me scratch my head. So it hit 2,300. We're off that high, but it breached that record, right? What's so odd is I was using the function HS, which is the historical spread, and I was looking at the ratio there of gold prices versus the 10-year real rate if you look at core CPI, and that usually has a deep negative correlation, right? And it doesn't. It hardly has a negative correlation anymore. It makes me scratch my head.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you on that. I, of course, am right now pulling up the gold chart, which I have not looked at in quite some time, and I love charting gold. It appears to be a legitimate breakout.
Yeah,
I mean, it really looks as though we could see gold at 2,500, which at this point is not that far away. I mean, I guess to some degree we're looking at an everything but the bonds rally in some way.
Right.
I think that's the odd one out. I think that those bond investors are really a little bit more cautious here than they have in the past. I mean, the commodity complex yesterday, I think it was up 4 or 5 days in a row.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
If I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Area, as much as somebody like a Salesforce would do, but this could be a big deal. I mean, if that happens, it completely shakes up the competitive landscape. But as Paul mentioned, I mean, it's going to be tough for regulators to approve anything that big.
Yeah, exactly. But then there are so many software companies. At some point, they're going to have to do some M&A, right? There's like a bazillion of them. I honestly can't keep them straight.
I agree with everything that you're saying, but the question is who the buyer is going to be.
Right.
The problem in this case, or in a lot of these cases, is regulators are very tough on large, of the big tech giants buying software or any company that much.
How are they going to feel about Apple and robots? So here's the story. So this broke when I was on TV yesterday. So this is Mark Gurman broke the story that Apple apparently has teams investigating a push into personal robotics, and that's a field with the potential to become one of the company's ever-shifting, quote, next big things. This is according to people familiar with the situation. They were looking at, say, robots that can follow users around their home, for example.
That's all I need.
Exactly. And they have also deployed an advanced tabletop home device that uses robotics to move a display around. What does this mean?
So at the CES, Samsung showed a demo of a robot that's following around and, you're working out and all sorts of stuff. So these things don't really move the needle. It's a fancy stuff to be part of the, Apple ecosystem. But, frankly, I mean, how many can you sell and how much money can you make? So doesn't get me excited, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I think so as we think about Apple, it seems to me the next big thing, to use that term, is got to be you have to give shareholders an AI play.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And perhaps it will occur as soon as their developer conference in June.
Yeah.
What do you think, whether it's this year or next, what do you think a viable AI play is for Apple?
Think about it, that our phone is a medium for do anything. If I give you, right now, if I have to, let's say, ask a question to OpenAI, I open the phone, go into the OpenAI app, and write my query. Imagine we don't have to do any of that stuff. You straight away ask Siri that question and you get a very good answer. Right now, the answers aren't very good. So that's the step that if they can figure out that algorithm in between, I think it's going to do them very well.
Did they figure it out, or did they work with Google and stuff or Microsoft to figure it out?
That's a very good question. And, Mark had reported that if they work with, in my view, if they work with Google, I think it's going to be much faster. I think if they work with OpenAI, same, it's going to be faster. Just because we've only heard that they got rid of the car division a few months ago, reallocated some engineers there. If they had something, they would have deployed it, or would have showcased it. So if they're working very hard to come up with a new product, you're not going to just come up within 2-3 months and be ready for it. So I hope, for their sake, for their stock, that they do announce a partnership with one of those two companies and showcase people what capabilities can be there. Now, remember, in the case of Microsoft, when they have a deal with OpenAI, their products have enhanced very quickly using OpenAI's backbone or technology, whether it's Office or whether it's GitHub, the coding platform. It's been very quick, so it can be done. But we'll find out in June.
The stock's down 11% this year. Lends me to believe that the marginal hedge fund buyer is not going in there buying a position ahead of this June event. Is that? I mean. What are you hearing out there? Do people think we'll get something this June or not?
Apple has always been more of a value play for a long while. In between, it became a growth story because during the pandemic, there was a lot of games downloaded. And, so now that growth phase is over. Now we're getting back to that single-digit growth rate. I always thought they had maybe a high single-digit number, but this year it's going to be low single-digit to even flat. So it's going to be bad this year only because of China. But having said that, this is a company that can grow, revenue 5-6% in a normal year.
So this is why the robot thing, if we circle back to that, confused me. Because why would they put anybody into something like that? Why wouldn't they just take those workers and put them into an AI segment to work on that instead? Like, why?
It could be somebody's pet project. I mean, it's just, these are such
Literally.
a, I mean,
And
yeah,
they can afford to do it all, I would argue.
Okay, well, fair enough, fair enough. Are they going to do a big buyback?
They have been spending almost $90 billion a year for buybacks. I've been hoping
More?
they will do a little more, but that's not the case, because they do have to showcase whether they really can fix the China situation or not, because I don't think buybacks would help that unless we have some clarity on China or AI.
On China, since you bring up China, how do we get clarity on China? Because right now, if I were a shareholder, I would feel like that is by far the biggest headwind to this company.
It has been, and we've talked about it for the last 2 years. He just went to China.
Yep.
He's been, and basically telling everybody how China is very good for them and they'll invest more money. Maybe that changes the behavior over the next few months, because so far what we have seen in the last 2 quarters is they've been losing market share, and people are opting for a local brand rather than the Apple brand. And I think Apple's cachet, should come back if they are able to convince that China is an integral part of their story. I think it can turn around.
Well, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen there now, so see how that sort of pairs out. Before we let you go, also the FT had an interesting article that talked about Google considering charging for AI-powered search. What would that in essence mean? And that's a big deal for Google to do something along those lines, right?
See, once again, OpenAI, when you get the app, you get the free app, which everybody. If you want GPT-4, which is the latest version of their AI model, you have to pay a subscription. I think it's $19.99 a month or $20 a month. It's probably going to be the same thing for Google or anybody else out there, that you have a base level model that's free, and then you can charge a little bit more for a premium model. That's just part of how they want to monetize some of that
What
stuff.
I find interesting, Paul, I don't know if you noticed this, but when I search for something on Google now on my phone, I don't click any of the links anymore, because all of a sudden you can click on a drop-down menu and it gives you a quote from the page you would have clicked on. And I have to think, like, does Google lose money there? Is that or the other companies? Like, how does that affect them?
See, Google controls the search market, and they have a little bit of a threat in front of them. I personally think they will figure out, but the 2 demos that they have done in the last 1 year have not really worked out well for them. But I feel they will figure it out.
All right, Anurag Rana, thank you so much. He's in town. Again, the Bloomberg Intelligence folks, they're hosting a big conference here in our New York headquarters at 731 Lex about all things AI. I think they've got the definitive research report out there, deep dive on AI, and they're going to get some of the industry leaders coming to the Bloomberg headquarters today, giving us the latest on what has really been the driving force, not just in technology, but really across the markets over the last 18 months or so. So that's going to be cool this afternoon. Anurag Rana, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Looking at the markets here, still more green on the screen here. I'm going to call out, in honor of Matt Miller showing his face yesterday at the Bloomberg headquarters, Bitcoin. It's up 3% today. The volatility continues. 67,700 for Bitcoin. We'll keep an eye on that. WTI crude oil taking pause a little bit here, kind of flattish, about $85 a barrel for WTI crude oil. And gold also just down slightly, taking a pause in what has been just a big, big move. $22.94 for gold.
Yeah, crazy move, really, I would say, editorializing. Oil's quite interesting, too. RBC had a note out that talked about the concern about Iran retaliating on Israel could really be a stepladder to something more, and that it could be a very targeted Israeli attack from Iran, and that could be very dangerous for the whole Middle Eastern situation there. So clearly that underlying narrative we got to definitely pay attention to on that.
Yep, geopolitical risk in the Mideast. You see that in a lot of different areas, including the global energy space. WTI crude oil, $85 a barrel. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stocks put
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stage ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
When I was younger, I used to be in bands. I played drums in bands and toured America with them. Did a lot of session drumming, recorded albums. So yeah, it was good fun doing the drumming. The only reason I stopped it, well, I still play, but not as serious as I did when I was younger. But drumming doesn't pay the bills. I was never good enough to be able to pay the bills with it, but it was good fun. I started RJF, and the reason I started it was I saw a gap in the market for particular early stage and startup businesses. With the experience that I've got of running businesses, of being a finance director at the very biggest companies in the world to being finance director of small startups, we were looking at providing more than just basic accountancy services. So yes, we'll do all that. We'll do all the basic, all the statutory side of things that you need to do. But there's so much more value that we can add, and I wanted to have my experience to help these startups, because a lot of them don't really know where to go. You can go to your high street accountants and they can do a good job compliance-wise, but you would question whether they've actually been in the fire line of a business. Have you been in a business where you're thinking, how do I pay wages next week? Or business is really successful, what do we do with it next? Or how do we grow it? How do we grow into international territories? Or how do we grow our markets? How do we expand? So a lot of the experience I've seen over the years and seen different types of business in different sectors, I thought, well, it's a real value that I can add to these businesses as opposed to just being an FD, because a lot of these businesses can't afford an FD. But if we can take care of their statutory side of things, the compliance side of things, I'm on hand to be able to help and advise businesses with their growth strategy, or if they're in difficulty, help them through these times.
He's in business with The Rock and Danny Garcia and the XFL, so he's got his hands on a lot.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
So what's next? Like, what else is he working on?
I mean,
does he sleep?
I don't know how he does it, because I mean, he really is he's a globe-trotting deal maker. One of the things he identified, I think,
along with a lot of folks, was, the importance of sovereign wealth. So he's in business with Abu Dhabi, looking at a number of different things. Jeff Zucker, the former CNN executive, is a partner of his, looking at media deals. They took a look at the Telegraph over in the UK. They're involved in Skydance, which obviously is in the headlines today with the Paramount deal. So a lot going on for him, clearly. And as he said, as you heard him say in that clip, part of it was luck. I mean, he was at Goldman and, saw some things happening with the sports world. Clearly, the Yankees were a local client. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but they were. Yep. But, he clearly anticipated a lot of this collision, this coalescing, as it were, of business, sports, technology, media, et cetera.
One of the things we've all seen over the last, many years is just the continued increase in the value of sports, whether it's the franchises themselves in the various sports globally or the rights fees for the broadcasting. What's his view on that? Because it seems like you just can't lose money in this kind of stuff.
I mean, that's always the dangerous place to be, right? When it feels like that, which it certainly does. You're exactly right, Paul. That's exactly how it feels right now. And this again gets into a lot of your expertise around the media world. I mean, part of what is fueling that is this massive disruption in media between, broadcast, cable, streamers. Who's going to really pay up for the media rights for the big sports and even some of the smaller sports? We don't know. I mean, when this new NBA deal comes up, one of the big speculations is Netflix going to be in that? Is Amazon going to be in that? Or is it going to be some of the more traditional players? That flows straight through to valuations, as you alluded to. And, you're seeing, these teams just trade up and up and up. The Washington Commanders going for $6 billion, the Phoenix Suns going for $4 billion. I mean, these are eye-popping, mind-blowing numbers for franchises that 20 years ago were selling for like a couple $100 million.
So why did he freak out when he said sports is an asset class?
I think...
freak out is an overstatement. But, why does that worry him then when, he's part of making it an asset class?
I think because it has the danger of becoming sort of commodified and traded in a way that maybe takes out some of the opportunities to really. Some of the opportunity to find opportunities, if that makes sense. He had this one line that I love that we've been talking about in our production team, which is they try and arbitrage incompetence, which I think is one of the funniest things. And
where else can we do that?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, do you want to make a list? Okay. You want to make a list right now?
Okay.
Let's create a shared note, you and me, because I just love that idea. I mean, as an investor, that is actually what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to find these opportunities where it's like they're not running it right. Let's go in and run it better.
So how does Alex, in these conversations, I would think Alex is, in most of these, kind of an insider. He knows all these people. He's probably seen a lot of the deals that they've seen.
Well,
he knows
this
the same
one,
people.
Oh, totally. You're totally right, Paul. I mean, this one was fascinating because, this is a guy who actually was instrumental, Jerry, in helping bring Alex to New York, which is, one of the biggest deals that happens for the Yankees in the last 25 years, as you well know. The other thing they talked about was, getting together over dinner with Randy Levine, the president of the Yankees, and saying, hold on, how do we put together a roster that can actually win us a championship? And guess what? They did in 2009. Yep. I mean, they were, the three of them, instrumental in identifying who could make that happen. So you're right. I mean, it's very fun. I fully confess for me to sit here and be like, no, you guys just tell this story. What was happening sort of behind the scenes and around that table?
Yeah, oh my gosh. I can imagine that you feel successful if you don't have to talk.
Yeah,
and they can just go at it because that's how I would do it.
Say more about that.
Yeah.
That's my contribution.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me how you felt about that.
Exactly.
So what else can we look forward to? What's next on your plate?
So a couple really good episodes, still to come. We're about halfway through the season. Brandi Chastain is one I'm especially excited for people to listen to. Of course, iconic player. And last week, we were down in Miami filming an episode with none other than the GOAT herself, Serena Williams. So that's coming up in a few weeks.
This is why you have sun on your face.
Yes.
So for our radio audience, I was like, why is he sort of tan? He's like sunny. I know.
Exactly.
Totally.
How does this guy pull it off? Yeah, so I can't wait for y'all to listen to Serena. She is unbelievable. It's stories and perspectives from her that you've never heard before. So very, very excited for that one down the line.
Okay, awesome stuff. Jason Kelly, chief correspondent for Bloomberg Originals. He's also a host and executive producer of The Deal. And on this week's episode of The Deal, Jason Kelly and Alex Rodriguez, they talk with Redbird Capital founder and managing partner Jerry Cardinale. Jerry, he going to break down his career, the purchase of AC Milan. They own that one, a storied franchise in Serie A in Italy, and so much more. He's also discusses how sports investing has evolved over time. So some good stuff there. We'll have that. Jason, thanks so much for joining us. You're bailing on me?
I'm bailing on you. I'm going to go anchor television at noon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Jason, did you break the chair? He kind of broke a chair over there as he was getting up.
It
Yes, I'm
Okay.
leaving you now. I'm going to go anchor television. Molly Smith will be stepping in for me.
So when Molly Smith comes in, you know what we talk about?
What?
Like with you, we talk energy.
Yeah.
With Molly, we talk tennis.
Oh,
'Cause
you
she
probably
is
like
the
tennis
resident-
better, don't you?
She is, yes, because she knows everything. Every player, every tour, some innocuous tournament down like, I don't know, like Key Biscayne or something. She's got like all
Is
this.
she a
skin
former
out.
tennis player?
She is.
I didn't know that.
She's a player.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Is
she's
this
a
my
player.
cue to join?
Yeah, you can hop
Yeah,
in
look at
anytime.
this,
You can
how
hop
we
in
did that so nicely. I had no idea you were like a tennis pro.
Oh, yes. Yes, my side hustle.
All right,
outside
so
of this
Molly's going to be
building.
with us for
I'll go
the
talk
next
about
half
oil.
hour or so until we end us off. Alex is going to head off to TV. You can watch her there, of course, all the time. So we'll be back with you right now. Can we go to Michael Barr for World and National News? Michael Barr, what do you have for us?
Thank you very much, Paul, Alex, John. President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will talk by phone today. It comes as celebrity chef Jose Andres talked about the Israeli attack that killed 7 of his World Central Kitchen food aid workers in Gaza, criticizing the operation. Andres told Reuters the group was targeted, quote, systematically, car by car.
You cannot be destroying every building. You cannot be destroying every hospital, every school. You cannot be targeting humanitarian. You cannot be targeting children. You cannot be fighting the basis of what humanity should be standing for.
Prime Minister Netanyahu dismisses the claims the WCK vehicles were targeted, saying the IDF regrets the incident. Search and rescue efforts continue in Taiwan after a powerful earthquake rocked the island, killing at least 10. More than 1,000 were injured. Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries has the latest on the recovery from Singapore.
It could have been much worse if not for a lot of building code changes and things like that that came into effect. And after that 1999 quake, there are still people stranded, potentially trapped, but it does seem like in terms of the human costs that it's topped out so far.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferry says emergency crews in Taiwan are trying to reach hundreds of miners who are trapped. Finally, a grim prediction from the American Cancer Society. They expect cancer cases will rise to 35 million people worldwide in the next 25 years. That report also says many who live in undeveloped nations will die from cancer because they don't have access to treatment. The study's authors say the numbers will likely be even worse with continued unhealthy diets, physical inactivity, and heavy drinking and smoking in some societies. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Back to you.
Hey, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Let's reset the set here. We have Alex Steele. She's gone off to do some TV. Joining us, though, is Molly Smith, Bloomberg U.S. economy editor, joining us in studio, going to help us out for the next half hour. Molly,
Yeah, happy
good morning,
to be
welcome.
here.
And we're going to talk. I want to check with you a little bit, just get the latest on what's happening in the world of tennis. But let's reset here in about 3 minutes or so. We're going to bring to you a simulcast with Bloomberg Television. Brad Lightcap. He's the OpenAI COO. He speaks with Bloomberg's technology anchors Ed Ludlow and Caroline Hyde, and we'll bring that to you in just moments. All right, we got a minute here, 2 minutes. What's the latest on the world of global tennis?
So we just wrapped up in Miami,
went to
where I
Miami.
was there.
Yes, awesome.
Happy birthday to my mom once again. And it was an awesome trip, and we got to see just about everyone. I, of course, would have loved to see the final. We had an American win, Danielle Collins.
Oh, now where did
I know, that's a name you can
from?
pronounce.
Yes.
Say it.
Danielle Collins. Where did Danielle Collins come from?
She went to UVA, actually, a college player, which you
wow.
don't see a ton of, but it's starting to pick up a bit more in men's and women's singles. So that was a great win for her. And really no surprise that Jannik Sinner won on the men's side. He really is the best player on the planet at the moment.
Oh, so he above Alcaraz, you think?
Yeah, and it was a pretty comprehensive win through to get to the final. He didn't beat Alcaraz on the way. The other finalists did, but just really impressive. The race that, I mean, the way that he's set up the points right now, I mean, he's lost maybe 3 times in the last 6 months.
Wow.
Pretty
All right,
good
so we got a
record.
lot of stuff going on there, and the next slam, the second slam, is the French. When is that?
Correct. So that's starting at the end of May. So
maybe we got time for
we're
that.
right now heading into the European clay court swing. For anyone who can get out to Monte Carlo, I would tell you it's the most beautiful tennis destination in the world. Highly recommend going there as a warm-up tournament to the French. So we've got that. We've got Wimbledon, and we've got the Olympics, which will be taking place back at the French Open grounds.
Okay.
Yes.
And are the top players going to represent their countries, do we think?
Oh yeah,
most part?
no, I think it's definitely, of course, I think any athlete would tell you, a huge honor to compete in the Olympics, but for tennis, this is definitely not as big of a deal as the Grand Slams are. There are no ranking points, it's just not really the same deal as it might be in track or swimming or gymnastics.
But it's still big. Okay,
Oh,
all right, so
yeah,
there's a little tennis nugget for you, folks. Now we're going to switch gears, go a little technology on you. It's all about AI. It's all about technology. That clearly is what's been driving this market. So Brad Lightcap, he's right in the middle of it, OpenAI COO. So we're going to hear from him in just moments. Just looking at the markets here real quick, S&P up 0.7%, and that tech-heavy NASDAQ, that's up 0.9%. So we have a lift to this market. Jobs day tomorrow will bring you full coverage of that. The market's kind of discounting Jay Powell's kind of a little bit dovish commentary. So right now, we want to get to that conversation. Brad Lightcap, he is OpenAI. He's the COO. And he sits down with Bloomberg Technology anchors Ed Ludlow and Caroline Hyde, talking all things technology, all things AI. Let's listen in.
For our Bloomberg television and radio audiences worldwide, OpenAI is top of mind across the world of technology. That includes for Elon Musk, who posted on X overnight that his EV company Tesla is having to boost compensation to ward off approaches for its AI talent. Those approaches, claims Musk, include OpenAI. Ethan Knight, a member of Tesla's team working on computer vision for FSD, was approached by OpenAI, so Musk moved him to his own AI company, xAI. Let's get to the OpenAI side of the story. Let's talk about talent. Let's talk about what's happening in the world of artificial intelligence. Brad Lightcap, OpenAI COO, joins us here in New York City. There's no accusation that anything wrong was done, but it highlights an interesting point right now. There is a lot being done on the training of prior generation models, future generation models. There is a finite amount of talent. Give the OpenAI side of this equation, how much of a premium are you having to pay out? I don't know if it's salary or stock or engineering freedom to get the top names.
Well, thank you, Ed and Caroline, for having me. It's great to be with you. You know, look, this is a competitive market for sure. It's an amazing place that we're at because there's very few number of people that can really make such a dramatic impact in this field. But we try and pull people into our mission, and I think that's historically what's been our strength is people want to build in the place where we're pushing the frontier the furthest, and also where we really think about the impact of the technology, both on a societal level and then also on an applied and industry level.
How big is OpenAI now? How many employees and where are they?
We're about 1,200 people.
1,200?
Yes, mostly in San Francisco, but also in London and Dublin, and increasingly other places in the world.
Increasingly other places in the world. The reporting was that Japan is the next frontier for you. What's the strategy there and where you choose? I don't know whether you call it opening a new market, but where you choose to have operations.
Well, we're very fortunate. We have a very global base of demand. So we want to show up where our customers are. We think this is going to be a global transformation. We feel a lot of pull from places like Japan and Asia broadly. And so we'll show up where we feel like we need to be.
And let's talk about where you show up from an industry perspective. You're here in New York talking to partners. We understand Sam and the teams have been in Hollywood discussing how Sora can be used, but ultimately how you can have a working relationship with companies and industries that think they're going to be upended. Talk to us about how those conversations are going, for example, with Hollywood and publications.
Yeah. You know, we take a very unique perspective here. We really model OpenAI as a partnerships company, and we think this transformation is going to be very broad-based. And so we're one company. We can't do everything ourselves. being able to find ways to partner with industry, with countries, with specific companies, that's really important to our mission and the way that we think about bringing technology to the world. By way of recent example, we work really closely actually with the publishing industry right now on ways that we can deploy AI into publishing to make the quality of journalism better, to make the quality of reader experiences better. We've heard nothing but really actually a lot of enthusiasm from that industry. And so we're always looking at ways that we can partner with industry. I expect a lot more from us in the future on this front. And Sora's a great example of where we really are excited about the impact that we can make in media.
It's interesting that media companies over in Europe, for example, seem to have got with that quite quickly. Axel Springer, a key deal that you sort of birthed early days, and Axel Springer therefore sees the business insider perhaps a little bit more blue links within ChatGPT. New York Times ain't on that discussion point right now. How is that legal fight and indeed behind the scenes discussion going with those sorts of companies?
Well, I can't comment on the New York Times case specifically, other than to say we think it's without merit. But the overwhelming majority of what we hear from the publishing industry is actually quite positive. There's a high level of excitement everywhere about what these tools can do, both to unlock better journalism, to give readers more access to information, to enhance the way that people engage with content. So the way that we actually think about even the fundamental business of information engagement and consumption. These things are all really possible now with language models and increasingly with multimodal models too. So we think we're just starting to scratch the surface on that opportunity. We've got a lot more to share there soon, but stay tuned.
You're being positive, being optimistic, of course you are. What's interesting is I come away from meetings where Hollywood is deeply anxious. People in my industry are deeply anxious. Goodness, everyone with a job is trying to work out how they adopt AI. And also there's this question that is ongoing of open versus closed. You're going for another legal fight at the moment. Elon Musk has dragged you into it and wants you to rename yourself. Where do you sit on the closed versus open? How much more open do you have to become?
Yeah, well, look, I think we really focus just on where we can deploy the technology and what's the best way to do that. And at the end of the day, we're going to focus on where our customers are and the way that they want to deploy it. We work with thousands of enterprises across the world. We spend a lot of time working with those enterprises on ways that we can configure the technology specific to their use case, specific to their stack. And we think that the easiest way to do that is the way that we serve it. But that's not to say that we wouldn't look at other ways in the future. We really ultimately want to be where we think the best place to deploy the technology is going to be.
For our Bloomberg television and radio audience worldwide, we're in New York City speaking to OpenAI COO Brad Lightcap. I want to learn more about where OpenAI sits in its growth, its day-to-day operations. You just said thousands of enterprises. We came to know you because of the explosive response to ChatGPT, and that was principally in the context of a consumer-facing chatbot. But it sounds very much like growth now is focused on that enterprise arrangement, licensing of technology. Can you give me proportions, the rate of growth for those two pillars?
Well, we've seen tremendous growth in the enterprise. 24 is going to be the year of adoption for AI in the enterprise. We felt really like 23 was the year that people just started to wrap their head around what was possible with AI in the enterprise. But increasingly, the market is pulling us toward real applications that are delivering real business results and a very broad focus on AI enablement. So how do we think about bringing AI both to our operations, but also to our workforces, and then also to new product experiences that we can deliver to customers? And we work with plenty of companies that are doing all three of those things at the same time. We think that's very possible. And it's having really dramatic bottom line impact today. So this is what we think the pull is going to be, and we're ready to support.
Brad, you're the COO, so I'm assuming you're responsible for also some of the purse strings involved in OpenAI's finances. Compute must be a really considerable cost right now. And with that, the energy consideration as well. Are you making enough revenue from this enterprise business to keep the lights on when you factor in the compute costs involved?
We are, yes. We think that we have, well, first of all, a very diversified business. And so we serve hundreds of millions of users with our ChatGPT product. And many of those users are paying users. Of course, we serve now over 600,000 individual users in the enterprise with ChatGPT Enterprise. And so we're just seeing tremendous momentum. We're very early innings on this. And so we look at it as, hey, this is the start of something. And ultimately, our priority is just to be able to deliver the best intelligence, whether it's in the enterprise or to individuals. That's the most useful, that drives the biggest business impact.
Kara, I'm thinking back to the conversation we had the other day with Danielle Amadei from Anthropic. And what she explained, Brad, was the relationship with AWS and Bedrock. They're getting a lot of business through that. You have a quite similar and actually a pre-existing situation with Microsoft and Azure. Are you able to explain how much new business comes through that conduit of the Microsoft relationship and what were probably existing Azure enterprise customers?
We're really fortunate to have Microsoft as a partner. They've been an amazing partner with us for a long time. We've increasingly looked at the world as ways that we can bring OpenAI technology to life together. We're very fortunate that they're offering our models through their Azure OpenAI service, but we have an independent business, so we serve customers independently of Microsoft. And
is that one bigger than the Microsoft avenue?
Yeah, look, it's fluid between the two, but we really are focused on what's best for the companies we work with, and we're very fortunate to be able to diversify the surfaces in which we offer our products. We think the demand for this technology is massive, and so being a smaller company, obviously, having a partner that can help bring the technology to scale is really, really advantageous for us, and we're excited to support them in the future.
It's an extraordinary, very novel kind of partnership. And in fact, the whole of AI is birthing these kind of frenemy relationships. I just think of also acqui-hires, deals that seem to be going. Now, Microsoft has just seemingly acqui-hired the whole of Inflection. What did you make of that particular move, particularly when suddenly you got the co-founder of DeepMind coming in to be the head of consumer AI at Microsoft, and ultimately you put out a response to that, being like, congratulations. But how did that make you feel as the previous partner of choice for Microsoft?
Well, we're excited for them. We congratulate Mustafa and Karen and the whole team, and we work very closely with Microsoft, and so we think that's going to be a major advantage for our partnership as well. We're focused on what we can control in the OpenAI side, which for us right now is really thinking about the next wave of the technology and thinking about ways that wave is going to start to enable businesses. And the more we can think about that problem together, the better we'll all be.
A lot of CEOs that I speak to, some of them are your customers, say they're technology agnostic right now. In other words, they might use GPT or another foundation model. They might also be building their own in parallel. And when we told our audience you were coming on the show, a lot of people wanted to get your thoughts on the Palantir relationship. It's an interesting case study. They seem to be one of the beneficiaries of the enterprise investment in AI, or at least the data analytics side. What's it like working with Alex Karp?
Yeah, well, we actually work with a bunch of partners that help us bring the technology to life, and there's so many ways to deploy the technology in the enterprise. That's what's kind of amazing about this technology is it's not just one function in the enterprise or one part of the enterprise stack. It's so diverse and it's so broad-based, and so we work with many partners to bring that to life, and we'll continue to look for partners to work with to help us do that. We're excited with the way Palantir has been enabling their customers on top of our technology, and we'll continue to support them going forward.
Brad, every day it crosses my desk. You know that I've done quite a lot of reporting on Sam's chip ambitions as well. There's some relationship going on between the UAE and OpenAI, fundraising or technology partnerships. Can you clarify what's going on there and why you'd need to raise funds from somewhere like that?
Yeah, well, look, I won't comment specifically on that. We broadly, though, believe that there's just not enough total supply in the world, and that
of AI accelerators specifically?
Of AI accelerators, and broadly that the supply chain will need to adapt to what we think is going to be this highly inflected and nearly exponential demand in the next 10 years. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about ways that we can make sure that demand is met. Part of it is just being able to bring our models to bear, but upstream of that is obviously making sure that the actual underlying hardware and infrastructure exists to be able to build the systems that we need to ultimately serve that demand. And so, we think a lot about it, and our hope there is that the supply chain starts to think about that the same way we do.
Brad, your mantra, your manifesto, your focus is to build artificial general intelligence for the good of humanity. And I speak to a lot of humans who are terrified. Can you encapsulate how you can, without regulation being there in place yet, and the EU's sort of putting the gauntlet out there, you're doing all of this without disrupting too much, too quickly, too hard?
Yeah, well, look, central to our mission is to make sure that we bring the technology in a way that's safe and that creates broad benefit. It's really encoded into how OpenAI was structured, and it is actually the thing that we spend our time thinking about how to deliver in real-world results today. And so we're very optimistic, and I can understand where the fear comes from. Things are moving very fast. Even for us at the center of it, it sometimes is dizzying. But look, our perspective is that this is an enabling technology at its core. It's going to make businesses more efficient. It can make people more productive. It can be dramatically inflecting in how people learn, how people can understand information. And so we think that that has a very broadly positive effect on the world. And the world that we wake up to 10 years from now will be one that we look back on, and really are excited to be able to go build today. And that's really what we wake up every day and want to go do. So.
We want to thank you being in the house with us, the COO of OpenAI, Brad Lightcap there, joining us in New York. We thank you.
All right, that was Brad Lightcap. He's the OpenAI COO. Speaking with Bloomberg Technology anchors Ed Ludlow and Caroline Hyde, talk about the future of AI. Right now, let's reset here. We'll get a Bloomberg Business Flash with Mr. John Tucker.
All right, guys, stocks higher after the latest data showed jobless claims topping estimates. It kind of the bad news is good news scenario. It gives fuel to the Fed to cut rates as soon as June. All 11 of the major industry groups in the S&P 500 were higher. Real estate, the best performing group. Next big data point for the Fed, tomorrow's jobs report. Meantime, Jennifer Lee at BMO will be focused on any signs of wage inflation.
I think that's probably going to be the most critical piece of data that we're going to be looking for at that report is what happens with the average hourly wages, especially since what we saw last Friday with the wages and salaries component of the personal income and spending report that was up 0.8%, which was a bit of a shocker to yours truly.
Right now, the S&P 500 up 38 points. That's a rise of 0.75%. We're at 5250 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 201 points. That's a rise of 0.5%. The NASDAQ 100 right now up 163 points. That's a rise of 0.9%. Two-year yield that is higher right now by just 1 basis point. That's at 468. The 10-year unchanged at 434. Among some of the individual movers, Reuters says Alphabet talking with financial advisors about potentially making an offer for HubSpot, the online marketing software company. And HubSpot shares there up close to 9.5%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. It's time now for a look at news from around the world. And with that, we toss things over to Bloomberg's Michael Barr.
John, thank you very much. World Central Kitchen is demanding an independent investigation into the Israeli strikes that killed 7 of its staff in Gaza. The aid workers were helping to deliver desperately needed food to isolated and starving residents. WCK founder Chef Jose Andres told Reuters the group was targeted, quote, systematically car by car.
At the time, this looks like it's not a war against terrorism anymore. Seems this is a war against humanity itself.
After the attack, the U.S. said Israel must do more to protect the lives of civilians and aid workers in Gaza. Today, President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will talk by phone today. The death toll is 10 from Taiwan's strongest earthquake in a quarter century. More than 1,000 others are hurt. Rescuers are racing for a second day to reach more than 600 miners, hotel workers, and tourists trapped in high terrain around the epicenter in eastern Hualien. But it could have been worse, as we hear from Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries in Singapore.
The economy seems to be getting back on track. You heard from TSMC, one of the world's most important semiconductor chip producers, that they are getting their operations back online. We do expect to hear at some point an impact on terms of their deliveries and sales, but that will be pretty limited given how quickly they're able to get these factories going again.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferries in Singapore. Dash camera video circulating online shows large boulders careening down the roads, one boulder crushing a car. Heavy rains and winds gripped the Northeast. This morning, more than 100,000 people lost power. The powerful nor'easter slamming the East Coast, creating a dangerous morning commute for millions. Winds hit up to 64 miles per hour, knocking down trees and power lines in places like Connecticut and New Jersey. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, Molly?
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Molly Smith sitting in for Alex Steele here for a few minutes here. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Molly, all eyes, you're the economics editor for Bloomberg News. I know you're paying attention to the jobs data tomorrow.
Oh, yes.
I guess 214,000 is a consensus for change in non-farm payrolls.
Yeah, that would be the fourth straight month above 200,000. And we had a preview out today by Rich Miller. If you guys are looking at the terminal, the headline was "Immigration Helps U.S. Jobs Grow Faster Than Powell's Speed Limit." So this is an interesting look of what we call neutral payrolls growth. So without getting too technical, this is kind of a speed limit for showing how fast job gains can run without providing too much pressure on wages at a level that might be considered inflationary. So the idea here is that economists think that underlying pace of payrolls growth is now going to be substantially higher than before because of the boost we're getting from immigration. That the idea also as well there being that immigrants tend to fill these lower paying jobs. So this is bringing on supply of workers, which we desperately need, especially in a lot of areas where the labor shortages are still persisting, but they're also not competing for jobs in a way that would be putting an upward pressure on wages. So it's an interesting idea, and especially if has implications for the Fed, if they then understand this neutral rate of payrolls growth to be higher, they might then be comfortable letting the jobs market run at a level that before they thought was going to be unsustainable or potentially inflationary. So it could really change the way that we think about how, quote, hot the jobs market is going forward.
Interesting stuff. You can check that out on the terminal. And just looking at, again, tomorrow, the average hourly earnings on a month-to-month basis forecasted to grow about 0.3%. That'd be a little hotter than last month. But on an annualized basis, looking for a 4.1% increase on average hourly earnings.
And that would be the
wages.
slowest, I think, in over 2 years.
Right.
The 4.1. Yeah, that would be since about mid-2021.
Okay, so that kind of, and it was 4.3% last year. So that kind of goes to the issue of the story is we are seeing additional job growth, but not necessarily that commensurate wage growth. That would be problematic, I guess. Wages are going up, but they're not at a problematic inflationary level for the Fed.
And that's kind of why, like, this, conventional wisdom would have made you think, like, the opposite would be true, that if you are getting this robust pace of hiring, that wage pressures must be going up with it. But the fact that we're seeing hiring going up and wage pressures generally coming down tells you that immigration might be part of the puzzle here.
Yeah, so you don't often hear that story told out there, but perhaps there's a little bit of a silver lining to this immigration issue, which is obviously a number top story and top issue for voters as we kind of go to the polls later in the year. All right, let's get a quick snapshot of kind of where we are in this market. S&P up about 0.7%. The NASDAQ up a solid 1%. Same for the Russell here. Yields coming in are just, kind of steady here. The 10-year Treasury yielding about 4.34%, pretty steady there. In the commodity space, WTI crude oil off about 0.5%, $85 even for WTI crude oil. The Brent's about $89 even. Gold taking a little bit of a breather today off its big run it's had over the last several months, $22.92 for gold. So we got a little bit of look there in the commodity space. Balance of Power with Joe Matthew. That is up, and that starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Washington, D.C.
To be a fly on the wall. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as President Biden meets today with Benjamin Netanyahu about Israel's war against Hamas and the killing of civilians, Palestinians, and others in Gaza. We'll talk about the political stakes here for the Biden campaign coming up with Bloomberg opinion columnist Nia Malika Henderson, who's got her eyes on the campaign trail, which, of course, runs through the border. We're going to explore some of the talking points we've been hearing from both sides with immigration attorney David Leopold, with analysis today from our political panel. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Democratic analyst, Bloomberg politics contributor, alongside Republican strategist Chapin Fay from Actum. It's all up after a look at Wall Street. As always, we start there with our friend Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. Higher across the board right now. A rally for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. Stocks are gaining as traders gear up for tomorrow morning's jobs report. Some of the world's largest tech companies are driving the gains. S&P right now up 39 points. That's an advance of 0.7%. Dow Industrials up 0.5%. The Dow up 181 points right now. The NASDAQ Composite Index is up 164 points, up now by 1%. We've got the 10-year yielding 4.34% with a 2-year at 4.68%. Spot gold is down $7 the ounce to $22.92, a drop of 0.3%. And West Texas Intermediate crude back below $85 a barrel, 84.92. WTI down by 0.6%. One of the hot topics of debate on Wall Street is the timing of Federal Reserve rate cuts given the November election. Peter Cheer is head of macro strategy at Academy Securities.
We'll probably see 1 to 2 cuts. I'm guessing June and July. Partly, I think they want to get some cuts in. You know, they're going to say there's a lag time, all those things. Powell seems committed to it. And I do think they want to get something, bolster for the economy ahead of the election, but not too close to the election. I think they would really like not to have to do anything at the September or November meetings right at the heart of the election. So you get 2 cuts out of the way, June, July, we move on from there.
Cheer was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television. Google parent Alphabet has been talking to its advisors about the possibility of making an offer for HubSpot. This according to Reuters, citing people familiar with the matter. We've got HubSpot shares up now by 9.3%. Alphabet shares, they are down 0.3%. Again, recapping stocks higher. S&P up 39, now up 0.8%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Hey, Charlie Pellet, thank you. We'll be back with Charlie for an update on trading throughout the hour. Of course, the program, the fastest show in politics. Welcome to Balance of Power. Thursday edition, it's Little Friday. And the word at the White House is outrage, following, of course, the killing of 7 volunteers, aid workers at the World Central Kitchen working for Jose Andres. It really seemed to be, if not a turning point, an inflection point here in the conversation about this administration's policy in Israel when it comes to Israel's war against Hamas and the conduct that we're seeing inside of Gaza. The president today, of course, is going to be meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, which is our top story right now. As I said earlier, to be a fly on the wall, or I guess a fly on the line. They will not be in the same room, but it is expected that Joe Biden is going to give Benjamin Netanyahu a piece of his mind. The question is, will it matter in the end as we continue to send weapons to Israel? And we're hearing from quarters throughout the Democratic Party here, former Obama officials expressing outrage, allies of the president like Chris Coons, Senator Van Hollen in Maryland, typically those who are there to express support. And this is a big deal on the campaign trail, which is why we wanted to spend some time with Nia Malika Henderson, who's always writing about the Biden campaign and this race to the White House for Bloomberg Opinion. She's with us at the table now. Nia, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
See you.
This is tough when you're hearing from John Favreau, when you're hearing from allies on Capitol Hill. I can only imagine what Barack Obama tells Joe Biden if they're talking behind closed doors. We're not going to see or hear this meeting today. So what's the job for Joe Biden?
Listen, I think it's to express what he's somewhat already expressed, which is outrage at what has happened here with these volunteer workers who are really doing the Lord's work, right? Feeding these folks. Starvation is an issue in this area, and you have here a situation where 7 are killed by the IDF. They have said this was an accident. You've heard from Jose Andres, who has said he feels like these aid workers were targeted, which is quite a big claim to make. And of course, this will be the subject of this conversation that Joe Biden has with Bibi Netanyahu. I think the real question is, as you said, is this sort of a turning point or is it sort of something more subtle, an inflection point? Does this change the conduct of the war from the point of view of the IDF going after Hamas? Does it change America's support? You've heard from the White House so far that it won't, that they will continue to supply arms to Israel. And listen, you've heard from people like Bernie Sanders, who's obviously a Jewish American, say, does this make Americans complicit, right? This idea that we're funding this war with taxpayer dollars that is ending up killing so many, not only Palestinian civilians, but more recently, this terribly tragic accident where these aid workers were killed.
Yeah, and this is making it more difficult now to bring aid. The idea of a temporary pier appears to be, if not on hold, up in the air because the aid organizations don't have an agreement yet here and they don't want to put their people at risk. Remember at one point Joe Biden at the beginning was saying, the way to deal with Bibi is to hug him, to hold him even closer at times like these. They've been estranged essentially for months now. Does he need to start hugging him again?
Well, listen, that sort of hugging of Bibi, that was their history, right? Biden and Bibi were close. And now you hear out of this White House real discontent from Biden in terms of Bibi's actions and in terms of some of his rhetoric, and some of it has been quite profane in terms of the way Biden has referred to Bibi Netanyahu. And we'll see. I'm sure we'll get a readout of this call at some point. But listen, Democrats have
sanitized readout,
right? No curse words. But listen, they may share some on this phone call.
So that's the kind of conversation we're talking about here, though. The thing is, politically speaking, like I said, we can't watch or listen. So Joe Biden can't reap the political benefits from that. That he saw borne out again in the polls on another primary night this week with a protest vote that won't go away. You've written about this. Is it getting worse?
Listen, I think it's certainly not getting any better, right? You've had instances where the White House has tried to reach out to some of these leaders, Palestinian Americans, Arab Americans, who are sort of at the tip of the spear of this anti-Biden.
The deputy director of national security to Michigan, for crying out loud. That's serious.
Yeah, and he's had one-on-one meetings with some of these folks. And listen, some of these folks have walked out of meetings that they've had face-to-face with Joe Biden to express their displeasure, to go public with their displeasure, but also to try to get this White House to change course. Right, to have a ceasefire, to have more skin in the game in terms of what Bibi is doing over there. We have been loyal allies. The U.S. has, obviously, of Israel throughout this whole thing, and the elimination of Hamas is their stated goal. And as of now, the U.S. is continuing to support that goal, which means providing arms and ammunition to the IDF.
As we spend time with Nia Malika Henderson, writing for Bloomberg Opinion, and the headline today, Mitt Romney should campaign for Joe Biden. This all ties in together here. This is the time in which Joe Biden needs to start consolidating here and taking a general campaign seriously. He's been raising a lot of money. But your point is, what happens to these never-Trumpers, a lot of whom turned out? Nikki Haley pulled 10% in all 4 of those states the other night. But you're looking at folks like Chris Christie, like Mitt Romney, even Liz Cheney. What world are we in when Liz Cheney could possibly endorse Joe Biden?
I mean, this is, she hasn't officially, but she has said she will do everything.
And you think he needs to start asking?
I think I think he could start asking at some point. There was a piece in Politico that said, yes, he should start asking. My thing is, if these folks are saying that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, then that should be enough to make them campaign for Joe Biden. I talked to Sarah Matthews, who was somebody who worked in the Trump White House. She was sort of up close and impersonal during the January 6th events and resigned as a result. She is anti-Trump, but she's also pro-Biden. And she said, listen, she feels like she needs to come out and say she's going to endorse Joe Biden because it makes what she says about Trump more real and
Is she
palatable.
pro-Biden, or this is a protest?
It's sort of both. It's anti-Trump, but it ends up being pro-Biden, right?
Well, it does if she votes for him.
No, that's the thing. She is going to vote for Joe Biden, and she's telling other people that they should vote for Joe Biden.
Christie, though, think of the time that they've spent dumping on Joe Biden. That would be kind of crazy to turn around.
I think you're exactly right. It almost, you think about the conventions in this summer, and typically you'll have somebody from the other party endorse whoever the Republican nominee or the Democratic nominee.
Yes, right.
Who will that be this go round? If I have to guess either Liz Cheney or Chris Christie, I imagine it could be Liz Cheney.
That would be monumental.
Given the fact that she's out there.
You could almost see it happening.
I could see it happen with Liz Cheney, not so much Chris Christie.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's remember when Joe Lieberman came out at the that would be the moment of this convention.
Exactly.
Happened, right?
And so last time in 2020, it was John Kasich for Joe Biden. We sort of forget about that convention because it wasn't a traditional
It's almost
convention.
like it didn't happen.
It was in a COVID era. And so I, if I had to put money on it, my mom doesn't like me to bet, but I'm going to say I would bet.
That's good stuff.
I'd bet money on Liz Cheney.
We play this back when it happens.
Yeah.
As for the rest of them, Mitt Romney is another one, another name out there that seems maybe pliable when it comes to a Biden campaign.
I think that's right. Again, he has come out and said that he's not going to vote for Donald Trump.
Yes.
He voted twice to impeach him. He's a man of deep faith. Joe Biden, also a man of deep faith. And I think in that way, he could talk about Joe Biden's faith and suggest that he would make a better president than Donald Trump. Listen, these people need to have a spine. They need to have some skin in the game. If they are, in fact, truly believing that they want to block Donald Trump from being president, then the only way to do that really is to, I think, bolster Joe Biden.
Well, so then you wonder where does the endorsement go? And you're talking about the anti-Trump Republicans who could vote for Joe Biden, those who held Donald Trump to under 80%, as you write, in the Wisconsin primary this week. So, okay, you get a Chris Christie or a Mitt Romney. How does that translate to people, real voters on the ground?
That's the big question. And I think the university of voters, of anti-Trump voters, probably like 10%. And those people were critical in 2020.
That's the difference.
That's the difference in these states, right? That are going to be, decided by a couple of thousand votes here and there. And so this is going to be an all-hands-on-deck election. If you think that Donald Trump should not be anywhere near the White House, as Liz Cheney has said, then if you're Chris Christie, if you're Mitt Romney, you need to get on board with Joe Biden and try to help him in some of these states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, where the sort of moderate Republicans, sort of the Chamber of Commerce Republicans are. Mitt Romney, I think Chris Christie, Liz Cheney can speak to those folks.
Do we still call them Lincoln Project Republicans? Maybe that was the last
Oh,
one.
that was the last thing, which I think.
I got to ask you about this fundraiser that Trump is talking about.
Yeah, $30 million.
Well, supposedly, yes. This is after Joe Biden, pulled $25 million, I think it was, at Radio City. He's up there on the riser with Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. And somebody
Lizzo
was watching
there,
from Mar-a-Lago.
Totally.
And was so bothered by this that he had to top it. So there will be a fundraiser. Apparently, this will be in Palm Beach. $43 million, reportedly, on Saturday. He's got all the billionaires lined up. The criticism here from an actual campaign organizing standpoint is you just front-loaded the whole thing. And we're peaking early.
You mean
when it comes to fundraising for Donald Trump in this case, to throw this event, is he helping himself trying to one-up Joe Biden?
Listen, we'll see what the actual numbers are. It literally came out the day that this fundraiser with Democrats came out. And Donald Trump says, "Oh, we're going to have 30 million now, and maybe up to 43 million."
Sure.
We'll see once the FEC reports come out how much they actually, are able to raise. I think a real problem for Donald Trump is he doesn't have those small dollar donors in the way that he used to that really powered his campaign. That really, I think, spoke to the grassroots energy of it. So he's got his hand out for these billionaires to really try to juice up his campaign coffers. Again, he's got all these legal problems. Some of that money that is raised, quite frankly, is going to go to some of these legal issues that he has. But they need some money. They need a big headline, and they need to start spending. They don't have the kind of offices and the sort of ad reach that the Democrats have had so far. But it's early still.
You don't think Lizzo's going?
I don't think Lizzo's going to be there. I don't think she's going to be there. Right. No. Lee Greenwood might be there.
That might be different, yes. In fact, I would expect that.
With his
Bible.
With the Bible.
Yes, here you go.
Exactly.
Don't be a stranger. Nia Malika Henderson, speaking of Lord's work, find her column on the Terminal and online. It's always a pleasure to see you with us here in the Washington Bureau at Bloomberg. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite and on YouTube, where you can find us right now by searching Bloomberg Global News. Of course, we've been hearing a lot about the border this week as well. Israel and the border are following Joe Biden everywhere he goes. Just a couple of days ago, Donald Trump talking about this. Remember the border bloodbath? And referred to prisoners, murderers, drug dealers, mental patients, and terrorists crossing the border on the daily. And we wanted to talk about some of the rhetoric that we're hearing on both sides of this whole story. With an expert who has been with us before on the program, David Leopold, immigration chair at UB Greensfelder, spent time as general counsel at the American Immigration Lawyers Association. David, it's good to see you. Welcome back. We understand that the fact is, according to our, at least, government agencies, most people crossing the border are poor families who are trying to escape either poverty or violence. How does that jive with what we're hearing from the former president when it comes to prisoners, murderers, drug dealers, and mental patients.
Well, the former president doesn't base anything he says in fact or reality. He based it, in terms of how he can rev up his base with hatred and vitriol and all that sort of thing. Look, number one, you're right. These are families coming to seek a better life. I'm not judging either way, whether they're doing it the right way, but these are families coming to seek a better life in this country for themselves and their children, like so many of our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents did. So they're fulfilling what America is all about, the promise of the land of opportunity. Sadly, the Republicans, Donald Trump, who basically that is the Republican Party, have made this into their issue. They're throwing out all kinds of incendiary statements. They're ginning up a lot of hatred. They're talking about great replacement theories, which is an anti-Semitic trope. It's ugly what's going on the Republican side.
So what's going to happen between now and the election? David, I wish I had more time with you, but in our next minute or so, I would love for you to describe to me what the border will look like when people are making up their minds this fall, because the border security compromise that was put together, of course, on Capitol Hill is apparently never going to see the light of day until after the election.
Right. Let's remember why. And that's because Donald Trump wanted to use it as a campaign issue. He didn't want to solve the problem. He wanted to yell about the problem. So that's why he ordered the people who wrote the bill, the senators who worked closely with the Republican senators who worked on a bipartisan basis, who wrote the border bill on immigration, which would have gone a long way towards solving a lot of this. Donald Trump said, no, don't do it. I want to use that as a campaign issue so I can spread all my vitriol and hatred. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen, sadly, is you're going to see Donald Trump and the Republican enablers use immigration as a way to get their base, 30% that supports them in this country, upset and angry and full of hatred. On the other side, you'll see Joe Biden talk about his accomplishments and what he's done for the country.
David Leopold with UB Greensfelder. Thank you, David, for coming back to see us. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is now 12:21 on Wall Street. Stocks are higher across the board. S&P 500 index right now very close to session highs. We're looking at a 41-point gain at 52.52. That's an advance of about 0.8%. Dow Industrials up 186 points now, up 0.5%. Nasdaq up 1.1%, higher by 178 points. Traders gearing up for tomorrow morning's jobs report are sending stocks higher. Some of the world's largest tech companies driving today's gains. 10-year yield now 4.34%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.69%. Spot gold down $11 the ounce to $22.88, a drop of 0.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude at 84.86 a barrel, down 0.7%. And Bitcoin at 68,024. Bitcoin up now by 3.5%. Amylyx Pharmaceuticals is pulling its drug for ALS, a progressive fatal nerve disease, from the market after a trial showed that patients taking it fared no better than those getting a placebo on a variety of measures. Amylyx is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It also said it will cut its workforce by 70%. Company shares now up by about 0.6%. Again, recapping, we got a rally underway on this Thursday here at the head of the jobs report. S&P now up 42, up 0.8%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, here's your host, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you. With word from the White House, the meeting between President Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu wrapping up here. We're going to keep an eye out for a statement from the White House, a readout, as we call it, from the press office to hear what was said in that meeting. Of course, an eye on potential funding, if not just the providing of weapons for Israel, has become much more controversial with this more recent story of the killing of 7 aid workers at the World Central Kitchen. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for coming along. A Balance of Power, the Thursday edition, live from Washington. As we turn our attention to what is about to happen, or I guess not happen, on Capitol Hill, lawmakers, boy, this has been a long recess, right? They're still at home, the home district work period. Others call it recess. Look, some of them are working, some are on Codell's, some of them are probably watching TV right now, or maybe YouTube. But when they come back, there's going to be a lot to do here. And apparently one of the very first orders of business will be funding for Ukraine. Speaker Mike Johnson promising that the return from Easter will bring this matter to the floor at once. And that is, of course, why Marjorie Taylor Greene filed the motion to vacate. So he'll have this hanging over his head as he tries to get work done. The fact of the matter is, they have not moved the rock on anything since the last time we sat down with Mike Dorning. And that's been at least a week. He's with us now at the table. Mike Dorning, of course, Bloomberg politics editor. It's great to see you. We're talking about a loan now, potentially, for Ukraine. We're also talking about a world in which it would take a majority of Democrats to pass anything. Is that the end of Mike Johnson's
well,
speaker?
It could be. It's unclear, and the White House seems to be giving them a little space. They're not like criticizing Johnson a bunch, even though they asked for this money back in October, and it's been half a year for the emergency funding. It's still not there.
Right.
But you know, this is a tough for him because he's got a very small majority. The hardliners don't really want to give money to Ukraine, and you know, he's got a lot of Republicans and Democrats who do want to help support Ukraine. So he's got to thread the needle here. He's brought up some of these ideas. I don't think they've really coalesced into an actual proposal, but he's doing the Washington thing of sending up floating ideas and sounding them out. The loan is one idea that President Trump, the leader of the Republican Party, had offered, and that, you know, it's kind of ludicrous in a way because you don't really expect they'd ever pay back this loan. I mean, the country's being invaded, its economy's destroyed, but at least it allows you to say that it's a loan, and, you know, maybe possibly someday their economy might be strong again, and at some point you might get some money back.
Yes, right. In the meantime, there's got to be an agreement so they can craft some legislation. That's going to take a minute. We're reporting that it could be weeks before anything sees the light of day.
You know, our reporters have spoken to, you know, key sources in the Republican leadership, and pretty much the message they've gotten across the board is nothing's going to happen for weeks here. At a minimum, it could take longer. Now, Speaker Johnson had said in his interview that they would do it right away when they came back, but I think the response is right away is kind of in the eye of the beholder. You know, a Washington right away might not be the same thing as a Bloomberg newsroom right away.
Fair enough. You mentioned, I think this is fascinating, the White House giving Mike Johnson space. Reports have said they're actually in touch, that he's talking to the White House directly about what might come next year, which is the very thing that's going to turn the Freedom Caucus and conservative Republicans away from him.
I think it's possible, although just talking to the White House, that's something.
That's not a sin?
That's kind of something that you always have to do when you're in Congress.
You would think.
But I think the thing that will turn them away from him is the idea that you're relying so much on Democrats to get stuff done. Now, like a long time ago in Washington, that was the way it happened all the time. You kind of let the majority of Congress work its will within some parameters set by the speaker, but nowadays they want to go to a much more partisan control of the House. And in this case, the hardliners in particular are saying, hey, if a lot of Republicans don't want something, you shouldn't do it. It's very clear, though, that Speaker Johnson, even though he had voted against Ukraine aid in the past, has said that he does want Ukraine aid, that he does want to help Ukraine, and that's his view of what's right. He just argues that other things have to happen first, and they're a higher priority.
Spending time with Mike Dorning on Balance of Power, I want to ask you about Israel. We just had a headline cross the terminal that says everything about Joe Biden's political situation when it comes to Israel, domestically speaking. Warren, Durbin, Elizabeth Warren, Dick Durbin urge Biden to boost medical supplies and aid to Gaza. This is reaching a point of controversy and urgency that he's not faced yet. We understand he just had the meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu. What does he do with progressive Democrats screaming from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue?
Well, I mean, actually, I would say that Warren and Durbin are like not bad people to look to because they're both quite progressive, but they also both have very strong relations with very strong Jewish communities in their states who are Democratic-leaning Jewish communities. And you see what they're doing is, unlike a lot of the progressives that aren't as strongly aligned with the Jewish community as Warren and Durbin, they're not saying stop sending weapons or anything. They're just saying send more aid. And that's kind of a way you can address some progressive concerns and still show that you're allied with Israel. But definitely Biden has to thread a needle here. He's personally very much aligned with Israel and is a big personal supporter of Israel. And there's a large segment of the Democratic Party that is very supportive of Israel. But there's also a large segment of the Democratic Party that's saying, hey, this is ridiculous, more than 30,000 casualties. Now you've got these aid workers bombed, and this organization is run by a very prominent Washington chef who's very active socially and
knows all of
these knows all the key Democratic politicians in Washington. So there's a personal tie here.
I think it's a really important part of the story that might not be initially assumed when you hear about a chef. Something like this happens. This is someone who's really part of the fabric, even the political fabric in Washington. Remember when he pulled his restaurant out of the Trump Hotel and the impact that had locally and nationally in that story.
And he's specifically been close with the Obama White House and also to some extent the Biden White House.
So with all of that said, you're hearing from Chris Coons, Chris Van Hollen, real allies of Joe Biden, that we need to reconsider the sending of weapons to Israel. They're referring to 2,000-pound bombs that we're just sending this week after the strike against the World Central Kitchen, whether it was accidental or not. Are we talking about strings attached? How does that come out in the form of legislation, if at all?
Well, I'm not sure how it would come out.
There's a drive for some conditions, though, right?
You could impose conditions that they have to, that we do have laws that say you cannot just give weapons to someone that's going to use them in a way that violates international humanitarian law.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know exactly how that works within the administration and how, you know, lawyers can always interpret things some ways, but there has been pushback that, hey, what Israel's doing doesn't really comply with international humanitarian law, which says you should try to avoid civilian casualties to the extent you can.
Yes, right.
And in fact, in Britain, there's a whole big push to get them to stop sending weapons on these very grounds that has a broad sort of popular thing with protests around the country. Here also you have Democrats getting increasingly concerned about it, and it is something that is just strikes at the heart of the Democratic Party, that it divides the party. And with Joe Biden, in his reelection, what he really needs to do is get his people more enthused to turn out to vote. The Trump supporters are enthused. They're going to turn out. And with Biden, he needs to rev up people. And when he's fracturing his party, he's going to turn off one side or the other. Even if they don't go over to Trump, they'll just be less enthused, less likely to vote. And that is a key strategic problem he faces down the line. It's the biggest strategic problem he faces in his campaign. And this is just one way in which that is surfacing.
Fascinating. Great to see you. I was looking forward to it. Mike Dorning, of course, a voice that we rely on heavily here on Balance of Power and helps to edit our political coverage here in Washington. Great to see you, Mike, and thanks for spending some time
Great
with
to
us.
be here.
Yes, sir. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We'll assemble our panel next after we get up to date on world and national news with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. President Biden is speaking by phone today to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The president has said Israel has not done enough to protect civilians after the deaths of 7 World Central Kitchen workers this week in Gaza. Bloomberg Government's Jack Fitzpatrick says he is watching whether the president's shift in tone will be met with action.
The Biden administration has not shown a plan or sort of previewed more specific changes in the policy toward support for Israel. And that's the question that's being debated.
Bloomberg Government's Jack Fitzpatrick covers Congress from Washington. Israel is bracing for a retaliatory Iranian attack following its raid on the Iranian embassy in Iraq. Israel's economic minister, Nir Barkat, tells Bloomberg that Israelis remain traumatized by the Hamas invasion.
There's consensus in Israel. The war will not be over until we eradicate all of Hamas. Sitting in Rafah, 1/4 of Hamas, we will fight evil until they surrender. There's no other choice, and time is not on our side.
Barkat says it's not only Iran that is funding jihadists. He says Qatar is backing them too, claiming that country is untrustworthy as a Middle East mediator. And Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is again in China discussing the parameters of economic relations as China seeks to export its way out of its slowdown. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Charlie Pellet. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, all pushing higher ahead of tomorrow morning's jobs report. Right now, we're trading very close to the best level of the day on the S&P 500 index, up 42 now, up 0.8%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 187, up by about 0.5%. NASDAQ is up 188, a gain there of 1.2%. 10-year 4.34%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.69%. Spot gold down $11 the ounce to $22.88, drop there of 0.5%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil now lower by 0.6%, $84.95 a barrel. There is a fresh tally of jobless claims ahead of tomorrow morning's jobs report. They are creeping higher as we hear from Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Weekly jobless claims are up, the highest since January, 221,000. While the labor market is holding its ground, planned job cuts are on the rise, the highest in the year based on industry data. Amazon is among the latest, announcing hundreds of cloud division cuts. For now, Friday's payroll report is forecast to show a respectable gain. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Vinny mentioned Amazon up now by 1.4%. Boeing's latest 737 MAX crisis has worsened an airline shortage of popular narrow-body aircraft, sending the cost of used jet rentals to the highest in years. The plane maker has been slowing production of its best-selling model to address quality lapses tied to a near disaster on a 737 MAX 9 jet in January. Boeing shares, they're up now by about 1.6%. Again, recapping stocks higher. S&P up 42 right now, up 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. And once again, your host, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We call it Little Friday around here. I think I saw Baby Friday in one of the tip sheets today. That means we're close to the threshold of the weekend. And I'll tell you what, it's going to be a party in Palm Beach, not to be outdone by Joe Biden. Donald Trump cooks up plans for a massive fundraiser that will raise more money than Joe Biden managed to bring in alongside Barack Obama and Bill Clinton in New York City last week. Remember the big Radio City Music Hall? Lizzo, Queen Latifah, $26 million. Joe Biden. Donald Trump is on track to raise $43 million in one night at this fundraiser. The inaugural leadership dinner, led by hedge fund billionaire John Paulson, reportedly tops out at a chairman level. $824,000 will put you at Donald Trump's table for dinner that night. How much would it cost to get on his iPad, though? You see this Axios earlier this morning? Speaking of the tip sheets, with the story about DJT, not letters DJT, I mean DJ, D-E-E-J-A-Y. Donald Trump, he likes to play his own music at Mar-a-Lago. And as we learned today, it's quite the lineup of greatest hits here. Elvis, Phantom of the Opera, Guns N' Roses, Sinead O'Connor. Nothing makes sense. Let's assemble our panel. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor. Glad to say she's back today alongside Chapin Fay, Actum Managing Director and Republican Strategist. It's great to have you both with us. Jeannie, what do you think on the greatest hits here? It's being compared to the way Donald Trump runs his campaign speeches. Just keep playing the hits. It's a method that has worked for him.
Did you just say Sinead O'Connor is on that list?
Yes.
I'm stunned.
He's a big
Sinead
fan of
O'Connor.
Nothing Compares to You, Jeannie.
Yeah, I have to agree with him there. A great song. I'm just surprised by that one. So the list doesn't make much sense. I would say, just having talked to a bunch of people between the age of 18 and about 22, 23, very few of the people you listed are on the top of their mind. So if he wants the young vote, he may need to dig a little deeper in that list.
I'm with you. Lionel Richie, anybody? Jesus Christ Superstar.
No, Joe, that's not it.
I didn't think so. Chapin, you pull in $43 million. That's a big haul. If he can do it, it would be record-setting, just like Joe Biden was last week. From a campaign management standpoint, is that smart? Maybe it is. I'm just curious. Do you tap all the billionaires, the whales, in April when you might need them in October?
Yeah, it's a challenge. He has sort of lost much of his small donor money, so he's got to depend on these billionaires. You can just feel how much this event at Radio City Music Hall bothered him, and the idea that it was described as the most lucrative fundraising in American history, or fundraiser in American history. He wants to beat that. We don't know if he will. One thing we can probably all agree is he will inflate those numbers until we get some real numbers out of from the campaign folks. But, he's trying to top Joe Biden. I think the question now is, for two people who are as well known as Joe Biden and Donald Trump, at what point does this money, this big money, stop, really helping them? Political scientists say, there's a point at which this isn't going to give them any more votes. So you need the money, but how much is another question.
Yeah. Chapin, sorry, give me your take on this. Is this good politics? Is it smart business to max out your donors in April?
Well, if you can max out a donor, I say do it as soon as you can, right? You need the money. And, on the campaign side of things, I always say, you have to be first. You want to be first in politics, right? If you're the second candidate to announce his candidacy, you're the second guy, right? The first guy or woman has, taken all the press. I would like to just take a step back to your question about, at what point does the money stop mattering? I mean, to a certain extent, it already does. Just to put up some, guide rails on this conversation for context, he was outspent by Joe Biden by $300 million in 2020, and in 2016 he spent half of what Hillary Clinton spent and won. So I think what you're seeing now is sort of the media war. Every FEC filing, period on every campaign is a race to raise as much money as you can, pull in as much money as you can to show, to legitimize your candidacy, right? That's not necessarily the right way to say it about someone like President Trump or Joe Biden, who are already legitimate candidates. We could argue about that later. But, new candidates, they have to establish themselves. And one of the ways you do that, one of the metrics, right? And especially with the media, you and everyone else in the media talks about the fundraising wars, right? So it is important to be record setting. It is important to win. I mean, there'll be people who are surprised that Donald Trump is bringing in this much money, or even Joe Biden, and maybe it makes them think, what am I, I am a contributor. What am I missing here? So it is important for the metrics purposes. And again, you want to be able to even the playing field as much as you can. So it is important in the end. But Donald Trump has already proven he can be successful being outspent 2-1.
It is interesting, Jeannie, we have to acknowledge, and you've talked about this, if Donald Trump is the king of earned media, what does it matter anyway?
That's right. And Chapin is absolutely right. I mean, he pointed to 2020 and 2016, 2-1. Hillary Clinton outspent Donald Trump. And as we all know, he still won. And this is in keeping with the data, which shows that once you reach a threshold of name recognition, you do get the benefit of touting to the media that you've broken these records, and that can be helpful. But most of our research shows that you can reduce campaign spending by 50%, and you're not going to get more votes. So there is a point at which this doesn't help. That's in the data, but we know that Donald Trump wants to say, I've got this record. He doesn't want Joe Biden to best him on anything, particularly raising money. So I think a lot of this with Donald Trump is going to be ego. He's sort of been goaded into this by the Biden campaign. And I think, we're going to see a lot of this as this campaign goes forward.
I'd love to ask you both about what's happening at the White House today. We're talking about Donald Trump's campaign. Let's get into Joe Biden for a moment and the Achilles heel that emerged yet again on primary night this week with an uncommitted protest vote that showed up in states like Connecticut and Rhode Island. We talked about this yesterday. A little more important when it shows up in a state like Wisconsin, which we saw this week. We understand he's on the horn right now with Benjamin Netanyahu. Their meeting is underway with a very difficult conversation. Chapin, what does Joe Biden do coming out of this meeting that's obviously not public to try to move the needle domestically in a way that will make progressives happy?
Well, I don't know if that's possible. And, you know, I'm sure progressives think the same thing about me, but I don't know if they're ever going to be able to be made happy, particularly in this, you know, in this situation, which is complicated for the president and, you know, people on the other side of the issue. This is very complicated, and it doesn't break down strictly by party lines. So President Biden does have to figure out how to communicate a support for one of our, you know, staunchest allies in a war to defend themselves, while also not losing the progressive wing of his base. And it's incredibly important and difficult for him now because we're in an election year, and we have seen some protest votes against him. But he has to be careful. He could lose a lot more votes when it comes to the general election. Now, you know, the flip side of that is Donald Trump seems to be able to bring out, you know, progressives and Democrats and everyone on the left out of the woodwork to come vote. So maybe that won't be an issue, but it very well may be. And I think you see, you know, Donald Trump is winning in what, 6 of 7 contested or targeted states or contested states right now. You know, President Biden does need to be very cautious about losing people. He needs to be building coalitions. And it's difficult. You know, I have some very strong views on this. Israel is our staunchest ally. And I think he, you know, he probably will never have me as a voter this election cycle, but, you know, he would lose, you know, people who care about foreign policy. He's going to lose them if he sees to, you know, be slipping in his support. But he has to, his campaign has to figure out what the, you know, sort of the give and take, the cost benefit analysis here on how he does communicate what this meeting is. By the way, that meeting itself may be very tense and a strange conversation because they are, you know, Netanyahu seems to be losing some of his own support as well. So, and he's in the middle of a war, right? So the two of them have to figure out as, you know, two staunch allies, how to navigate this moving forward together. I think if they distance themselves too much from each other, it'll be bad for both men.
Well, we're going to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about this in our second hour, next hour, with Chapin Fay and Jeannie Shanzano once that call resolves. And we've got our eyes out, of course, on a readout from the White House. More with our panel coming up in hour 2, so be with us as we bring our TV audience into the conversation here from Washington as well. I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee Lyons will join at that point with an eye on the economy here. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about jobs. I guess we already are. That's the way this goes with a string of data. Tomorrow's the big one, of course, and we wanted to connect with Molly Smith in New York with JOLTS in the air here. Job openings a little changed in February. I want to get a sense of what we're in for tomorrow, this day after we heard from Jay Powell. Molly edits our economic data coverage on the terminal and online. And Molly, I wonder if we've got good news for Joe Biden tomorrow or not. And of course, this is a good news, bad news situation when you factor in the Fed. He doesn't always look for the same stuff the market does he?
No, he definitely doesn't. So I think right now, it's kind of hard to find things in the job market that aren't going well for Joe Biden. Of course, the difficulty in that is how he communicates that to the voter base. And obviously the overriding challenge being inflation seems to be wiping out a lot of that optimism. But keeping it with the jobs report for now, we're expecting to see a 4th straight month of payroll gains of over 200,000. That's well over the average rate that we saw, you know, going into the pandemic. This is still a very high rate of job growth that we're seeing, and really just fits into this narrative of a very only gradually cooling labor market, that the unemployment rate, yeah, it's a bit high for where it's been in this cycle, but historically still pretty low at under 4%. And wage gains are looking like they'll probably continue to moderate on a year-over-year basis. So these are things that the Fed wants to see, too, in a way that if you can get this great blend of robust hiring but wage gains slowing, that really fits this whole soft landing narrative really well. So it could actually be one of these rare situations where this is good news for both Biden and the Fed if they can manage to spin it that way.
Only Molly Smith could bring the good news on both sides here.
We try.
That's a lot of pressure. That's too much pressure. But I was struck by Jay Powell's remarks on the job market yesterday, Molly. He was speaking at Stanford. We carried the remarks live. And, of course, he's got a dual mandate. We talk about, you know, interest rates all day long around here. But his view on the job market, tight labor market over time does enormous social good. What does he think about the data tomorrow and the status of this job market?
Right. So it is refreshing, I guess, in a way that the Fed chair, you know, he does think about us everyday people. You know, it's not just talking to a room full of economists all the time. And to be a bit more real, like, of course, to think, you know, it's not like saying something so controversial that like a strong job market has benefits to a lot of people for a long period of time. I think what was really interesting, what he was saying, and that a lot of economists have been zoning in on, were his comments on how much more benefit we can get from the supply side in terms of more workers still coming back to the labor force, in terms of other improvements in supply chains, and how all of these different resources can still be tapped to still help ease inflation. So that really seems like he still thinks there's more room on that side of the equation to help get inflationary pressures down.
I just think about those conversations that he had with Elizabeth Warren a year or two ago.
I don't think he likes to think about those
dangerous
conversations.
man. No, I bet he doesn't. Maybe in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. But she was accusing him of preparing to destroy the job market. And Molly, that hasn't happened.
I remember, I think we all probably do, her pointing the finger at Jay Powell and calling him a, quote, dangerous man. So that quote will forever ring on, but it hasn't really happened yet. And of course, that's not to be insensitive to the fact that the unemployment rate has risen from, 3.5, I think, at the trough of this, to 3.9 now. So people have lost their jobs, but we're not talking the massive job losses that typically accompany a downturn.
I'm glad you could join us, Molly. We'll be thinking about you at 8:30 tomorrow morning when the jobs report is released. Molly Smith with us live from New York. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Glad you're with us on the fastest show in politics. Kaylee Lyons will join the conversation in less than 5 minutes, only here on Bloomberg.
of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The meeting is underway. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As President Biden meets today with Benjamin Netanyahu about Israel's war against Hamas and civilian casualties in Gaza. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Kaylee, we knew this would not be an easy call.
No, especially given the language we have already heard from President Biden in the aftermath of the death of 7 humanitarian aid workers working on behalf of World Central Kitchen earlier this week. World Central Kitchen, of course, founded by Jose Andres, the famous chef that is well known here in Washington and well known to President Biden himself.
Yeah, that's right. This is going to be interesting to see how long the call lasts and how quickly we might get a readout from the White House on this. This is obviously not a public meeting and one that they're going to want to disseminate very carefully. We'll talk about that with our colleague Ian Marlowe, Bloomberg senior reporter covering diplomacy, just the perfect voice for this today with another important meeting going on. Janet Yellen just touched down in China.
Yeah, she'll be there for several days. She's going to be focusing obviously on economic issues, specifically the question around China's industrial overcapacity.
Right.
So we'll be looking to see what kind of headlines we may get out from the Treasury Secretary's second visit to China in just the last 9 months. We certainly have a lot to cover this hour. But of course, as always, here on Bloomberg TV and radio, we check first with Charlie Pellet, who's got a look at the markets in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kelly. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, all advancing right now ahead of the jobs report tomorrow morning. Right now, the S&P 500 index up 39. That is a gain of about 0.8%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 172, up 0.4%. NASDAQ, the composite index, up 178, up 1.1%, while the NASDAQ 100 index also up by about 1.1%. The 10-year yield, 4.34%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.69%. Gold now lower by $12 the ounce to $22.87, a drop now of 0.5%. A retreat today for crude, down 0.4%, 85.12 a barrel on crude, and Bitcoin up 3.2%. Bitcoin 67,826. Google parent Alphabet has been talking to its advisors about the possibility of making an offer for HubSpot, an online marketing software company valued at about $34 billion. This according to Reuters, citing people familiar with the matter. HubSpot shares, they're up now by 7.9%. Google shares, Alphabet down by 0.5%. Again, recapping, stocks are higher. S&P right now up 39, up by about 0.7%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. And once again, here they are, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet with his eyes on the markets. Thank you so much. Meantime, Joe and I wishing we could have an ear to the door in the White House right now as President Biden speaks by phone with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. As you mentioned, Joe, it may be some time before we actually get a readout, or at least lines from the White House on what exactly it is Biden and Netanyahu discussed today, but we know probably the general gist of what the messaging from the U.S. president to the prime minister will be.
That's for sure. You made a great point following what happened on Monday. The story just changed. The op-ed from Jose Andres, the outcry that we've heard, the outrage that we've heard from progressive Democrats. This was not supposed to be an easy call, and I suspect that it is not. As we recall, and I mentioned this earlier today, that line from Joe Biden that when you're having trouble with Benjamin Netanyahu, you hug him closer. And I wonder how much hugging is going on right now for two men who have been largely estranged for the past couple of months. That's why we bring in Ian Marlowe for his take on this, Bloomberg senior reporter covering diplomacy. Ian is waiting, just like we are, for a readout on this meeting. I wonder, Ian, your thoughts on what might happen next and whether it leads to a change in policy.
That's the big question everyone is asking right now. There's no question that what happened with the World Central Kitchen, that aid workers, the 7 of them who were killed in that awful strike earlier this week, has changed the sort of tone and dynamic. And I think you've seen that from the Israeli side, apologies from the very highest levels of the Israeli government and the Israeli military apparatus. Biden coming out saying is outraged, Secretary of Defense Austin saying much the same. The question, though, is does this move the needle really when it comes to conditioning U.S. military support to Israel? And at the moment, everything that we see and hear from the administration seems to be that they're sort of continuing the line here. They've called for a swift and transparent investigation. In the past, in the last few months, when we've seen incidents where the U.S. has expressed concern or even something getting close to condemnation of strikes that have killed too many civilians or aid not getting in, we've generally heard, we're concerned, we trust the Israelis to investigate, and we're sort of staying the course. What we saw the other week with the U.S. Not using their veto at the UN to knock down a United Nations resolution at the Security Council calling for an immediate ceasefire, that was sort of a sign of how strained things have gotten between the U.S. and Israel. But doing something at the UN, which the U.S. immediately came out and said was non-binding and stressed that it didn't really change much, and actually changing, the hard, impact of military support, which has, been going on for decades, and it's the cornerstone of the relationship. That's a very big and different change that we're talking about.
Yeah, well, Ian, we had a similar conversation yesterday on this program with Jonathan Panikoff of the Atlantic Council, and what he told us was essentially the only leverage the U.S. has over Israel is really big-ticket items. It's intelligence sharing, it's F-15s, it's major bombs. That is what foundationally this relationship has historically been built on, and if you were to start conditioning that kind of supply, that would fundamentally change the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Is the fact of the matter here that there's just not really any low-hanging fruit for the U.S. to be using to influence the actions of Israel at this point?
Yeah, I think, and Panikoff has made the point that you can't go from 0 to 25 here. With this kind of military aid stuff, it goes straight 0 to 60. Do you know what I mean? There's not many things left that the U.S. can tinker with. I think U.S. officials, believe that they have conditioned and influenced Israel over the course of the conflict. They point to things like humanitarian aid getting through in the first place, which was never really a priority for Israel in the early days of the war. I was actually on Secretary Blinken's trip to Israel, where they engaged in something like 9 hours of negotiations that went until the middle of the night, trying to get the Israelis to let in or agree to let in humanitarian aid in like the early weeks of the war. So, the U.S. does believe that they have had some influence over Israel since the beginning. But if you're a critic of the administration, if you're a critic of Israel, if you're one of the protesters outside, some of the embassies or, down in front of the State Department or the White House, looking at what's happened since the war began, it's kind of cold comfort. I mean, the U.S. says that they've helped with humanitarian aid, but then you see that there's a looming sort of man-made famine, as the UN says. There's now more than 30,000 civilians killed, according to the officials in the Hamas-run Gaza Strip. And it just kind of looks still that things have gotten worse. And so a lot of people think conditioning military aid is the only thing left. But it does really seem to be a little bit too far for this administration. And they have argued, privately and publicly, that would send a message to Hamas that the U.S. is really sort of on the brink of abandoning Israel entirely, because the without U.S. military support, Israel is going to be, Iron Dome missiles to munitions they're using in Gaza. A lot of that stuff would start to fall off and suffer sort of, in the near term. And then there's the longer term threats, from Hezbollah, in Lebanon, and the other Iranian proxies around the region. So there's a lot to think about there.
Absolutely. Ian Marlowe, Bloomberg senior reporter covering diplomacy and national security. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. He, of course, has been following this story so closely, including, as he mentioned, traveling with the Secretary of State Antony Blinken to the region. And it's worth noting, Joe, that it's not just the Middle East where Secretary Blinken has been going or could very well go again in the future. He is expected to make his own trip to China a few weeks from now, after Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen.
I think Ian was with him on the last one, as a matter of fact. And this is, fascinating. Janet Yellen touching down there this morning. Are we getting into this sort of good cop, bad cop mode with Yellen and Blinken, and then, in every quarterly call maybe with Joe Biden? I'm kind of trying to understand the roles that everyone in this administration are playing.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I would certainly expect that Janet Yellen, in her position as the Secretary of the Treasury and also as a former Federal Reserve Chair, will be far more focused on economic issues than maybe some of the geopolitical issues around Taiwan or something else that the Secretary of State would probably bring. But this is part of just a rotation of cabinet secretaries talking about all of their different issues that pertain to their departments as they make these visits to China. And on that note, we want to speak with someone who knows China incredibly well. Gary Locke is joining us now. He's former U.S. ambassador to China, also former U.S. Secretary of Commerce. Mr. Locke, thank you so much for being with us. This is, as we've mentioned, Secretary Yellen's second trip in 9 months. What tangible could come out of this second visit? How much tangible ever comes out of things like this?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you, Joe and Kaylee. And let me just say that this trip by Secretary Yellen is very important in continuing the progress and the momentum of talks between President Biden and President Xi many, many months ago. We're seeing a thaw in the relationship, and it's critical because we have issues of great contention between the United States and China, but also issues and opportunities of great cooperation, whether it's working against North Korea to stop them from developing a nuclear weapon, to finding a cure for cancer, or trying to address climate change. There's so many areas in which the world is expecting partnership and leadership from both the United States and China. But at the same time, we have some very difficult, very hot issues, economic issues, geopolitical issues between the United States and China. So the more dialogue there is between the top leaders, top officials of both countries, the greater the progress will be in these areas.
Ambassador, we heard from Secretary Yellen on her stopover, her layover in Alaska on the way to China, speaking specifically to our economic relationship, which has been evolving. Listen to what she said, and we'll have you respond. Here she is.
We've agreed that it's important to both of us that we don't want to decouple our economies. We want to continue, and we think we both benefit from trade and investment, but that it needs to be in a level playing field.
If that was hard to hear, Ambassador, she's talking about not decoupling, as we've heard before, but that it needs to be on a level playing field. And we're hearing that this administration is carving out space to protect additional new industries, like we've seen with high-tech chips, for instance. And I wonder to what extent you see that, in fact, leading to a decoupling.
Well, there will be some natural decoupling with countries all around the world and involving many different sectors, because as the pandemic demonstrated, no country wants to be overly reliant on supplies, whether it's consumer goods, manufactured goods, or medical supplies from another country. Because if there's another pandemic or even a natural disaster, a huge earthquake, or political upheaval in another country, we don't want, for instance, companies in America suddenly cut off from so much of what they receive from China, which is why you're seeing a lot of companies, multinational companies, U.S. companies, foreign companies, diversifying their supply chain so that they're not so reliant on China. So much of what American consumers use every day and purchase every day in their daily lives comes from China, whether it's microwaves, whether it's the tools that they use, clothes and shoes, barbecue sets, you name it. Much of that comes from China. So that creates jobs for the Chinese people. At the same time, China depends very much on American-made goods, including our farm goods, our agricultural goods. China is America's largest agricultural export destination outside of Canada or outside of North America. And so our farmers depend on selling their soybeans and their wheat and their apples and their cherries to China, along with Boeing. Boeing's number one, most of Boeing airplanes are sold to carriers around the world, including China. So our economies are intertwined, and which is why Secretary Yellen is saying we don't want a complete decoupling, but companies, whether Chinese companies or American companies, are beginning to diversify their supply chain to include other parts of the world.
Well, as we talk about the supply that comes from China, Ambassador, one of the things we know that the Treasury Secretary is going to be talking about specifically is industrial overcapacity and the way that that can be manipulated in terms of supply and demand to affect pricing or access to certain things that China is producing. When she goes and airs those concerns, how likely is it that China is going to receive those and say, okay, yes, you're right, we will be changing our behavior on that front? Isn't it to China's advantage to continue that kind of overcapacity in production?
Well, China is trying to jumpstart their economy coming out of the pandemic by offering subsidies and government incentives for industrial output. Certainly, they are leading the world in terms of the manufacturing of electric automobiles and the battery technology that goes with electric automobiles and buses, and also in the solar area. But if they do so by stimulating or having too much capacity, dumping their products into the world, flooding the world with their products and driving prices down, that's going to actually destabilize the economies and sectors in many other countries, including here in the United States, with some of the infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Act incentives to bring manufacturing back to America, especially in the solar, clean energy area. That will disrupt and undercut many of the efforts that America and other countries have embarked upon, which will lead to perhaps retaliatory measures against Chinese companies for dumping, unfair subsidies, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, that will upset the world trade relationship and even cause problems for China itself. So I think the message from Secretary Yellen is, yes, you want to be the world's leading supplier of electric automobiles and battery technology and solar equipment, but you have to do it on a level playing field. And I think that's the key message there. Otherwise, there will be repercussions, not just by the United States, but by other countries around the world. And that can also, in the long term, hurt China.
Spending time here on Bloomberg TV and radio with Gary Locke, the former U.S. ambassador to China. We want to let our audience know that we've just received word from the White House that President Biden's meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu has come to a close. Ambassador, I know it's not what you're here to talk about today, but in our last moment, and I don't want to set you up to cut you off here, but what does China think about America's involvement in the Middle East?
Well, China is watching very carefully to see how the United States responds, along with how the United States responds to Russia's invasion and military action in the Ukraine, and what the West does. Does the West really back up its allies? Will it live up to its word of guarantee? Because otherwise, there are many countries in the South Pacific, in the Pacific region, where the United States has pledged protection and defense. And
Beijing is watching. Ambassador, thank you. I wish we had more time with you. Come back and talk to us again. Gary Locke, of course, as well, the former governor of Washington, former U.S. Secretary of Commerce. I'm Joe Matthew with Kaylee Lyons in Washington. This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street from Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, and yes, the Russell 2000 all advancing. Broad-based rally today ahead of the jobs report tomorrow morning. Here's where we stand. S&P right now up by 0.7%, higher by 39 points. The S&P at 5250. Dow Industrials right now up 178 points, up by about 0.5%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is advancing now by 172 points for NASDAQ. That is a gain now of 1.1%. We've got the 10-year yielding 4.35% with a 2-year 4.68%. Spot gold is trading lower by $9 the ounce to $22.90, down by about 0.4%. Crude oil lower by 0.4% as well. WTI 85.13. Bitcoin up 3.2%, 67,862 on Bitcoin. Paramount Global shares are lower today as investors digest reports that the media company is getting closer to a deal to merge with Skydance Media. Analysts expressed some questions over a potential deal. Yesterday, you recall, the stock spiked about 15%. Today, Paramount Global down by 8.2%. Again, recapping, stocks higher. S&P right now up 39, up by about 0.8%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington, and once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Limes.
All right, Charlie Pellet with a look at the Thursday trade. Thank you so much. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. And Joe, the fact that it is Thursday puts us now 3 days out since the death of 7 humanitarian aid workers working for World Central Kitchen in Gaza, killed by Israeli strikes. And just a day, so we're 2 days out now from a primary in which voters expressed their displeasure, protest voted against President Biden in a number of states, choosing uncommitted or uninstructed as the case may be, because they are dissatisfied with the way that he has handled this conflict and perhaps his relationship with the Israeli government. And of course, speaking of the Israeli government, the president was just speaking with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and sources at the White House say that call has now wrapped up. We just don't know what exactly was said.
It's probably going to take a minute for us to figure that out, but the political stakes are not new for this president, and now that we're hearing from Biden allies, from members of the Obama administration, all criticizing the policy that this administration has taken, it does make you wonder what happens from here. If this is an inflection point, what does it lead to? So we assemble our panel. Jeannie Shanzana was with us, Democratic analyst and Bloomberg Politics contributor, today joined by Chapin Fay, Republican strategist at Actum. Great to have you both back with us. Jeannie, Joe Biden has an opportunity here with this meeting. How does he use it to leverage this to his advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got a preview of that last night with Austin's call with the Israeli defense minister. It was apparently heated. I think Biden is going to say exactly the same thing. Outrage at what happened, need to investigate, need to protect aid workers and civilians, need to wait to go into Rafah. Politically here, I think the White House is thinking this readout will show how angry Joe Biden is by what has happened and how he is expressing that to the prime minister. I'm not sure it is going to be effective, though, and I worry about a very, very mixed message that Joe Biden is sending, and I don't think it is helping him politically at home.
Well, we did just get a statement from the White House officially. It just says President Biden spoke with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel today to discuss the latest developments in Israel and Gaza. A readout of the call will be issued soon. So, of course, we'll provide you the details when we have them. That statement in and of itself doesn't really hint at much that went on in this conversation. But when we talk about the political difficulty of this for Biden, knowing that many in the Democratic Party, Chapin, are unhappy with his handling of it, it's worth noting that we are starting to see really a divide in which Republicans are incredibly pro-Israel. Not to say that President Biden is not, but have been much more vocal about it, critical of potentially any criticisms that the Biden administration is providing to Israel. Could that also play in politically to some of these more vulnerable Republicans in places like New York and districts that Biden won? Could the Israel policy be weighing on them as well, just as we're seeing it weigh on the incumbent president?
It could, and while I can't speak for every district around the country, there are certain marginal districts here in New York where there are very high Jewish populations and also very high Arab and Muslim populations. So it could cut both ways. I think there are probably larger Jewish populations the way redistricting has worked out in some of these districts, particularly on Long Island, I'm thinking about. So it certainly could have an effect. And while I did say earlier, it doesn't cleanly divide on partisan lines. You're right. Support for Israel in general has always been, a more Republican issue, if you will, than Democrats. What I'd like to say about this meeting is I don't know why we're holding Israel to a standard higher than we hold ourselves and the rest of the world. Right? It was an absolute tragedy what happened. But I think it's important to remember that every tragedy that happened subsequent to October 7th is because of October 7th, right? And we've heard people talk about, Israel's reaction and what, the president wants them to do. They have already admitted the mistake. They have apologized. They have said they would do their own inquiry. And they've already said that they're going.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See? I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo. We can do that. Bingo's my cockapoo. Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed. get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
In this call, progressive Democrats on Capitol Hill are going to listen very closely, and they're going to parse the words of the readout that is forthcoming from the White House. Should conditions be attached to future weapons shipments to Israel?
That's what I think we are hearing more and more. I mentioned Chris Van Hollen as an example of that. I think things are getting shaky in the Democratic side in the Senate on this issue. There is widespread concern. And so I do think that is what we are going to be hearing as next week rolls around, because again, you are hearing this on the ground, and I know we like to describe it as sort of a progressive left is where this is started from, and that is true. But I can tell you that it is spreading like wildfire through the Democratic base. That's why Joe Biden is rightly so concerned about the politics of this and saying things like the First Lady supports a ceasefire. That is a message to tell you how he is hearing this. But again, I think his messaging on this is leaving him open to some real challenges as we move into this convention this summer if we don't see a ceasefire beforehand.
All right,
He
Jeannie
is in an impossible
Shanzano.
position. Sorry.
Sorry, Chapin, you want to expand upon that thought?
No, I was just agreeing with everything she said. Ultimately, he's in an impossible position. You know, selling
Right.
weapons, supporting Israel, but also trying to get the war stopped. He's in an impossible position.
Yep, tough indeed. Chapin Fay and Jeannie Shanzano, our political panel today. Thank you both so much for joining us. Political discourse at its best, Joe.
Yeah,
it's
I
important to
think they
consider
both
all
agreed on
sides of this issue, but yes, both saying that President Biden is in a tough spot here.
For sure.
All right, we want to get over now to Amy Morris, who is world and national news in our 99.1 studio here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Kaylee, and as you guys were just discussing, the phone call is over. President Biden spoke by phone today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the first call between the two world leaders since the airstrike in Gaza that killed 7 World Central Kitchen workers. Israel's Minister of Economy and Industry, Nir Barkat, says he regrets the AIDS workers' deaths, but friendly fire incidents are inevitable in war, and he says the group that's intentionally killing people in Gaza is Hamas.
Similar to the way that Nazis were eliminated in the Second World War, we cannot leave 1/4 of the Nazis in Rafah. We have to make sure that we eliminate them off the face of the earth. And that is the challenge we all have. And we are all united, all of Israelis are united in completing that war and eliminating Hamas off the face of the earth.
Israel Economy Minister Nir Barkat was a guest on Bloomberg Surveillance. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg's plan to create a $100 billion fund to support Ukraine is now getting pushback from some NATO allies. They're reining in expectations about exactly how to support the fund, keeping it viable for 5 years. Several ministers warning the alliance that they shouldn't be making promises to Ukraine that they can't keep. And there's no formal invitation for Ukraine to join NATO this year, so the alliance is instead looking to propose a package that could serve as a bridge to membership. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stage ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
When I was younger, I used to be in bands. I'd play drums in bands and toured America with them. Did a lot of session drumming, recorded albums. So yeah, it was good fun doing the drumming. The only reason I stopped it, well, I still play, but not as serious as I did when I was younger. But drumming doesn't pay the bills. I was never good enough to be able to pay the bills with it, but it was good fun. I started RJF, and the reason I started it was I saw a gap in the market for particular early stage and startup businesses. With the experience that I've got of running businesses, of being a finance director at the very biggest companies in the world to being finance director of small startups, we were looking at providing more than just basic accountancy services. So yes, we'll do all that. We'll do all the basic, all the statutory side of things that you need to do. But there's so much more value that we can add, and I wanted to have my experience to help these startups because a lot of them don't really know where to go. You can go to your high street accountants and they can do a good job compliance-wise, but you would question whether they've actually been in the firing line of a business. Have you been in a business where you're thinking, how do I pay wages next week? Or business is really successful, what do we do with it next? Or how do we grow it? How do we grow into international territories? Or how do we grow our markets? How do we expand? So a lot of the experience I've seen over the years and seen different types of business in different sectors, I thought, well, it's a real value that I can add to these businesses as opposed to just being an FD, because a lot of these businesses can't afford an FD. But if we can take care of their statutory side of things, the compliance side of things, I'm on hand to be able to help and advise businesses with their growth strategy, or if they're in difficulty, help them through these times.
Gearing up for tomorrow morning's jobs report, some of the world's largest tech companies are driving today's gains. 10-year yield, 4.35%, with a 2-year right now, 4.69%. Spot gold is down $9 the ounce, down by about 0.4% to $22.90, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 0.3%. WTI, 85.22 a barrel. Alphabet is said to be talking with financial advisors about potentially making an offer for HubSpot. That's an online marketing software company valued at about $34 billion. This, according to Reuters. Alphabet has reportedly met with Morgan Stanley bankers in recent days about a potential offer for HubSpot. HubSpot shares, they're up 7.5%. Alphabet down now by 0.4%. Again, recapping, stocks are higher. S&P right now up 35, a gain of 0.7%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts. Here they are, Kaylee Lyons and Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet with the latest look at the markets. Thank you so much. Meantime, Joe, we have the latest from the White House.
Yeah, this is the readout we were waiting for, Kaylee, on the meeting between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm kind of amazed it came out this quickly, knowing how long it has taken in the past with meetings with President Xi and others, for instance. Look, let's cut to the chase here. This is a longer readout. The president calling for specific, as I read directly from the readout here, specific, concrete, and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers. Remembering, of course, the killing of those volunteers with World Central Kitchen. It goes on to write, the president made clear U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action on these steps. So we've set up the next chapter here, Kaylee, but it has yet to be written.
Yeah, and we also understand per this readout that Biden underscored that an immediate ceasefire is essential to stabilize and improve the humanitarian situation and protect innocent civilians. President Biden, it goes on to say, made clear that the United States strongly supports Israel in the face of threats, including from Iran and the Iranians threatening the Israeli people. So still they're expressing support for Israel, even as we are seeing
fascinating
a directive essentially from the president to take the steps that the U.S. thinks are necessary in this moment. So we want to turn now to Hadar Susskind. He is Americans for Peace president and CEO. He also was Sergeant First Class in the Israeli Defense Forces. Hadar, great to have you with us as we're just understanding what exactly it is President Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu talked about today. Will Netanyahu heed the words that Biden spoke to him when he's talking about the idea that Israel needs to make changes here? Do you have faith that those changes will happen?
Well, that is the big question. And first of all, again, thank you both for having me on with you today. You know, what we've been seeing in this back and forth between Netanyahu and his government and the Biden administration for months now is Biden and colleagues speaking out, pushing, urging for more restraint, calling for ceasefires, taking various steps, pushing in that direction. And we've seen Netanyahu and his government absolutely fail to heed that. And so the question at the moment is, what is that next unwritten chapter that you were referencing? You know, Biden and the American administration, we have leverage. It is not a theoretical. It's not just asking pretty please or asking for a favor. The United States supports Israel not only politically and theoretically, but concretely. We continue, as of yesterday, to send arms to Israel that are being used directly in Gaza. And so the question is going to become, when is President Biden going to move from saying what he thinks needs to happen to taking the steps that he can take to make it so?
I wonder, as we talk about this, you actually have been there in the IDF, which is known for its ability to strike with precision. We can talk to the Iranians about that after what happened in Damascus this week. Are we to believe that the IDF is simply incapable of controlling the outcome of its strikes, or that, in fact, Netanyahu and his military leaders have been indiscriminate? Can, in fact, we see a more responsible handling of the weapons that we're providing?
There's no doubt that you could see that. And what we've seen are a range of things. So what happened with the World Central Kitchen workers, that tragedy was 3 missiles fired, fired at 3 different vehicles. Netanyahu and the IDF have claimed it was a mistake, not an accident, right? They are claiming that a commander in the field did so without authorization. There's no question that he did so intentionally because he thought there was a Hamas operative there and made that decision. And we've seen that. There was a report in 972 magazine about the AI software that they call Lavender, which has been used to target Hamas operatives, and the way in which Israel has, for this war, changed the rules of engagement, broadening them from what the Israeli military itself refers to as targeted assassinations of only senior Hamas leaders to include more junior leaders and include more leeway and leniency in what they consider the acceptable number of civilian casualties to go along with targeting Hamas targets. So there isn't a question that this is some sort of accident or something out of their control that's happened, that they just don't have the capacity. This is a political policy decision about how to how to make the rules and take the actions of this war. And it rests with Netanyahu.
Well, when you talk about the calculation of just how many civilians they're willing to see die if it helps them accomplish their objectives, it raises the question of Rafah. When we have heard from Netanyahu that they plan for the Israeli army to move more than 1 million Palestinians who have sought refuge in that city in southern Gaza out, get them aid before going in to attack the remaining Hamas battalions there. Is that credible? Do you really believe the IDF can do that, or are they going to do so knowing that there's a certain amount of losses that they're willing to tolerate?
Well, it's very hard to imagine that they can do so in any way that we in the United States or most of the world would consider acceptable. And I will say, by the way, you talked about the IDF. The IDF is the arm. They are the implementers of this. These are all political decisions. Again, rest with Netanyahu, rest with the government. And, I think it's very hard to imagine where and how they could move those people. Netanyahu has, of course, not been clear, and he's intentionally not been clear about where they're going to move those people. There are people in his government, people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are calling for those people to be moved to the Sinai, to Egypt. Which, again, moving people out of an occupied territory forcefully is a war crime. Obviously, going through and indiscriminately bombing them is a war crime as well. So it's very hard to imagine any way in which Israel could initiate a large-scale invasion of Rafah that would not be disastrous, frankly.
What about ceasefire talks? Should I even be asking you about that right now?
Look, you should, because we need to get there. We have to get to that, right? This war has gone on longer than it should have in the first place. If you look at polling among the Israeli public, remarks from most Israeli political leaders, people there believe very deeply, and I share that belief, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is continuing this war for his personal purposes, for his political viability, for the continuation of his government. He's announced that, yes, of course, there will be investigations into what happened on October 7th, into the response of the military, the response of the government. But he keeps claiming that none of that can happen during wartime, of course. So we have to wait until after the war to do that. And everyone is waiting for after the war. They're waiting for that for elections. They're waiting for that for accountability. And so he has every incentive in the world to keep this going, even when his stated war aims are clearly unachievable. The idea that one can militarily eliminate Hamas is not based in reality. Whatever damage could possibly be done, and it has been done, to their military capacity, has happened in 6 months of intense bombing, in 6 months of intense invasions. It is certainly not giving Israel any greater security right now to continue this. And look, the vast majority of people in Israel, and I think many people here, believe that a military response, unfortunately, was necessary following Hamas's horrific attacks on October 7th. Hamas cannot be allowed to do that again. Israel has not only the right, but the fundamental responsibility of any government is to protect its people, and so they should be doing that. But they failed in that responsibility on October 7th, and they continue to fail by prosecuting a war that is not based in protecting the security of its people. It's based in the ongoing political survival of Netanyahu.
Well, to that exact point, Hadar, and you make up an excellent point about how you can take out the military capacity of Hamas, but how do you defeat an ideology in and of itself if this is a designated terrorist organization by many countries? But to the point about the kind of political calculation here for Netanyahu, we have seen just in the last 24 hours, Benny Gantz calling for early elections in September. We saw the thousands of protesters taking the streets to call for the same. Or just days ago over this past weekend. How should we be thinking about how Netanyahu is likely to respond to those kind of domestic pressures? Does that only make him double down more rather than listening perhaps to the voices of those dissenters?
But, those protests started last year, of course, before the war. Right,
sure, with judicial reform.
Right, and there were hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets. They were stopped by the war, mostly because people were in the war. They were in reserve duty. It was also impossible to gather safely in large numbers. They've come back. The numbers have not quite reached the pre-October levels yet, but they're getting there, and the intensity is frankly much higher because now you have dual movements of people calling for the government to prioritize the release of the hostages, which many, many, many people feel they have not done, and people calling for new elections, and a group that is smaller but growing, also calling for the end of the war. And so those are very important. The challenge is, even if you had, 1 million people, 2 million people out in the streets, the only way to bring down the government, literally, technically, before its term is up, is for a vote of no confidence by those in the government. So Gantz and Eisenkot, his colleague, personally, I believe they shouldn't be in this government anymore. They went in under a national unity idea saying we have to help, we want to impact how this war is being waged. I don't know what they think, but I certainly don't think they've had a lot of impact on that. I think they should leave the government. That's not sufficient to bring it down. They would still have 64 members. And the challenge is that those members in the government know that the likelihood is they're going to get wiped out in the next election. They're not going to be in the next government. So there's a disincentive for them to go to new elections, not only Netanyahu, but all of his partners. But there are a variety of forces, some related to the war, some related to the issue of the draft of the ultra-Orthodox who are currently exempt from military service, that have the potential to crack this government. And so the public pressure is very important. The international pressure is even more important. People in Israel are very finely attuned to what President Biden is saying, what Senator Schumer said, what other American political leaders here have had to say. And they understand that Netanyahu has done something no Israeli leader has ever done before, which is really, truly, deeply lose the confidence of American political leadership. And that's very damaging for him.
Hadar, we were looking forward to talking with you. He's the CEO of Americans for Peace, former Sergeant First Class in the IDF. Hadar Susskind, many thanks for being back with us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. In our remaining moments, we're turning to the next Big Take DC podcast. At the helm this week, Sarah Holder from Bloomberg, who joins us with a sneak preview from New York. Sarah, I'm told you're talking about the Direct File program. What should we know about it?
Yes, absolutely. So this March, there was a new tool that was launched by the IRS. For the first time, some Americans will be able to file their taxes online for free through the IRS's website. Now, this pilot is launched in 12 states, and only certain Americans are eligible, but it's a new frontier for the IRS this year.
Are people using it, Sarah? Or if it just launched in March, had a bunch of people already filed with TurboTax and other things like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I spoke with my colleague Erin Slowey, who works for Bloomberg Industry Group. She says the IRS has told her that as of mid-March, about 51,000 taxpayers had started filing through the service. They hope that about 100,000 Americans will file this way this year. But questions remain on how many people are using it. We spoke with one taxpayer who has used it. He said it was really easy. There weren't a lot of bells and whistles. And he was really pleased to report that it was free and there were no bells and whistles that sort of inspired him to pay or any hidden costs, which he said he's encountered in the past from private e-filers like TurboTax.
It's only available in 12 states, we understand, Sarah. Does the IRS have plans to expand it?
There are questions about whether there will be funding to expand the program. This year, it cost around $64 million to $250 million, depending on how many people really end up using it this tax season. Advocates are pressing for the program to expand to cover more taxpayers in future years. Right now, it only allows you to file your federal income taxes. So if you have to file your state income taxes, you have to do that through another channel. Only people who have pretty simple taxes like one income through W-2 are able to use this service. So it's limited in scope, but what the IRS is really looking for, Erin Slowey told me, is whether people like it, whether people use it, and whether the technology actually works. And thus far, there have been no glitches. The website seems to be working pretty smoothly, which is heartening for those who've used a government website before. The hope is it might expand.
All right, Bloomberg, Sarah Holder, thank you so much. Of course, the Big Take DC podcast drops this afternoon, so make sure to listen. And PSA, you got 11 days left to do your taxes.
I actually needed to hear that. I have work to do. Kaylee, I'll meet you back 5 o'clock on Balance of Power, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everyone, live on radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. It helps if I push the button on and throw my mic on.
It's your first time here. We'll cut some slack for you. Okay?
I just said I can't wait for it to be Friday. It's just one of those, everybody. It is, though, however, Thursday, April 4th, 2024. I'm Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenevec, live here on Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get to the setup because stocks definitely off their best levels of the session, but we're green across the screen here. But really, it's some of the biggest tech names, Tim, that are fueling some of the moves today.
Yeah, Meta hitting a new all-time high today. We are also less than 24 hours away from tomorrow's closely watched jobs report. As we await that release, here's something to think about. Immigration. Who knew? Helping U.S. jobs grow faster.
Yeah, interesting take, right, on our labor scene. Hey, also, we're keeping an eye on Apple. That stock, we have seen it bounce around a little bit higher in today's session. We've got more on that Bloomberg exclusive by our Mark Gurman of Apple's possibly next big thing. We're talking about robots.
Plus, it's today's big take, how hubris at Hertz doomed its massive bet on 100,000 Teslas and EVs.
This is a Netflix special in the making.
Oh, it's a great story.
All right, folks. Also, Redbird Capital founder and managing partner Jerry Cardinal on the latest episode of The Deal with Jason Kelly and Alex Rodriguez. So Jason's going to stop by and give us a preview.
Also, one more thing, the fried chicken chain that's cutting worker steps to save money. You don't want to miss that.
We do not at all. But first up, let's get an update on the trade on this Thursday and look at your top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, yes, Russell 2000, all pushing higher right now on this day before Jobs Friday. S&P up 22 to 52.34, roughly 20 points away from a record. We got the S&P up by 0.4%. Dow Industrials up 50, up 0.1%. NASDAQ Composite Index now up 125, NASDAQ up by about 0.8%. 10-year at 4.35% with a 2-year at 4.69%. Spot gold down 0.3%, 22.93 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 0.5%, 85.89 a barrel on WTI. Alphabet is reportedly talking with financial advisors about potentially making an offer for HubSpot. That's an online marketing software company valued at about $34 billion. This, according to Reuters. Right now, we have got HubSpot up by 7.3%. Alphabet, parent of Google, down 0.8%. Again, recapping here, stocks are higher. S&P right now up 22 points, up by 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much for that setup. All right, as you know, we did get some labor data earlier today. U.S. initial applications for U.S. unemployment benefits ticking up last week to the highest level since January. Meantime, continuing claims fell as levels remain below pre-COVID averages. And just remember, at this time tomorrow, we are all going to be talking to him about that U.S. monthly jobs report.
Yeah, on that, our Rich Miller reporting how one of the top issues on the mind of voters this election season, a contentious one, of course, immigration, is actually helping U.S. jobs to grow faster without wage pressures. That story by Bloomberg News economics reporter Rich Miller. He's with us from our D.C. bureau. Also here in our studio, Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent Mike McKee. I do want to start with tomorrow's report, Mike, and really just what to look for. A surprise to the upside, surprise to the downside. What would either scenario mean?
Well, I think at this point it would take a big surprise to really throw Wall Street off in this case, and perhaps the one that would cause the most movement in markets would be as if we came in very low, because people have sort of absorb this idea that we're going to be talking about, that we have a higher level of hiring on a regular basis. And Jay Powell has said that if the Fed needed to cut rates, it might be because the economy was slowing and it was showing up in the labor market, and we were seeing a real drop. We've already got fairly high rates, and the idea of higher for longer is kind of baked in. So surprise on the upside isn't going to affect people as much.
Quick question, did Jay Powell have any idea about what the numbers are on Friday when he spoke yesterday?
No.
Okay, good. I just wanted to clear that out. All right, Rich, let's get to your story. Let's bring you in. Immigration and the impact on the jobs market, which makes me think it could trend maybe a little bit hotter. But break it down for us and what we need to know about that.
Sure.
there's something what economists call it the neutral pace of job growth, and that's the pace that would neither tighten the market nor loosen the labor market. Now that used to be thought of as like about 100,000 a month, and Powell himself put it at that back in 2022. Excuse me. Now economists are saying because of all these immigrants that are pouring in over the border, that sort of speed limit, so to speak, on payrolls is centered around 200,000, so almost basically twice as much. And so that allows the economy to run hotter without as much pressure on the job market, without as much pressure on wages, and therefore is good for the Fed, and it's worried about inflation.
Hey, Rich, when we're talking about this, are we talking about migrants who come to the country legally or not legally right now? And for those who are coming to the country not legally, how long does it take them to enter the workforce? After all, we know that many of them do come here looking for work. Right.
Well, a lot of this data on immigration comes from the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and they're drawing on data from the Homeland Security. So some of this they're making assumptions based on what they're hearing from border agents about these kind of or not permanently. But the CBO estimates that it takes a few months, only takes a few months, which is kind of surprising, for these people to get integrated into the labor force. I know there was chatter in New York, for example, where I think Mayor Adams was pushing the government to even accelerate that to allow the migrants to work, so they wouldn't be such a drain on the city's economy up there.
Mike, I want to bring you back here. So I don't know, think about any reporting you've done on this or heard about it, or economists talking about it, or Fed speakers speaking about it, or Jay Powell. How does this, do they think about this?
Well, the economics community has been talking about this for a couple of weeks. It's kind of a big deal, and there's a lot of people who think this theory holds water and is important. There are a few who do not, including Anna Wong, our chief U.S. economist at Bloomberg. And if you sort of apply an Occam's razor to it, it's hard to say which side makes more sense, because if you're talking about undocumented aliens, undocumented workers, you're talking about people who probably don't want to answer questions from the Labor Department, even if they're relatively anonymous. And yet, if you're talking about the establishment survey, companies may be wanting to hire undocumenteds off the books, so they wouldn't show up on payrolls. So it's hard to know who's right. It'll take a few years, as Rich says, to really get a handle on this. But it's a theory that makes some sense.
We've always had immigration. Is there something, though, is it just because it's more substantial now, Mike?
It is much more substantial now. And in Rich's great story, they have some numbers on it. But over the last 2-3 years, it has really skyrocketed. And those people are going somewhere. And they're not coming to America not to have jobs.
Right.
Hey, Mike, before we let you go, we're getting a redhead that Brent crude is hitting $90 a barrel for the first time since October. How does the Fed watch energy prices or watch commodity prices like this?
They watch it as an important indicator of what might happen to consumer spending and or inflation on a headline basis. They're more concerned with second order effects, how it gets into the economy in other ways, because there's nothing they can really do about oil prices. And of course, the big mistake the Fed made in the 1970s was trying to accommodate higher prices by lowering interest rates. And so you would see the Fed look askance at that and probably not do anything. It'll be interesting to see the impact this has on the economy, because basically what happens is we need higher and higher gasoline prices all the time in order to get people to pull back, because they get used to $4. Now, do they get used to $5? Do they get used to $6?
Right.
The guy from Gas Buddy said this morning he thought that we would not see $5 again this year, except for some
California, probably.
Well, yeah, some gas stations that rip people off. And we know there's the Beverly Hills gas station that puts up the $7
Most
thing
photographed gas
just
station.
to get their picture taken.
Well said. All right. We're going to leave it there. Hey, guys, thank you so much. Michael McKee, international economics and policy correspondent here in studio. Rich Miller, economics reporter at Bloomberg News out there in our D.C. bureau. All right, now let's get to a stock that is definitely really a company that's on our mind today, Tim.
Yeah, shares of Apple right now higher by about 0.3%. It's a company we all hit on in the headlines yesterday when this Bloomberg exclusive crossed. We talked about it and talked about it and talked about it and what could be perhaps the next big thing at Apple. Carol, we're talking personal robots that maybe could follow you around the house,
If they do the
among
work,
other things.
If they do work, I'm in. All right, we wanted to know more. Back with us on this exclusive is Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent Mark Gurman. He's out there in our LA bureau. Mark, so lay it out for us. What exactly is Apple exploring and how far along are they in this process?
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me. So let me take you back to 2019. Doug Field, who now runs the electric vehicle division at Ford, he joins Apple to run its electric car project. And one secret team within the larger electric car group is a team dedicated to robotics devices. They were working on drones that essentially were silent. That was a really cool thing they looked at. They ended up nixing that. And then they were also looking at personal robotics. Now, that took went to the back burner for many years, but now the company is seriously looking at personal robotics in the home. Two main devices that they've been looking at. One that originated many years ago is a tabletop device. It's essentially a gigantic iPad connected to a robotic arm, and it can follow the head movements of someone you're on a FaceTime call with. So if I nod my head or shake my head or laugh, right, the iPad display will move on the robotic arm. Yes, the iPad display will move on the robotic arm to mimic those movements if I was on a FaceTime call with the other person, to make them feel like I'm, maybe in the room with them, even though it is an iPad mimicking my head. The other thing, perhaps more interesting, is the idea of a robot, a humanoid robot even, that can follow you around your home, can be a video conferencing telepresence device, and even one pie-in-the-sky idea that maybe will never come to fruition, or maybe a decade or two from now, could actually do chores for you, such as cleaning the dishes before you put them in the dishwasher.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mark,
that's the big one.
I'm thinking Jetsons. That's what I'm thinking, that robot. Just saying.
I would argue that, of all the things that you mentioned in terms of use cases, the one I think that would be most compelling to people would be an assistant around the house to actually help with those things that we have to do each and every day, like unloading the dishwasher, doing dishes, cooking, and the like. That seems to me, I don't want to dismiss anything that Apple's working on outright, but that seems to me pretty far-fetched and years away here. What's the timeline that we're talking about here?
Well, one, it is far-fetched. Two, it may never happen. Three, these are ideas that are being floated around. They're looking, what is the technology landscape going to look like 10 years from now? You see Tesla with Optimus Prime. You see other companies doing early explorations into the robot space. And so that's what they're doing, right? These are research projects. These are not formal consumer product development processes. These are still in the very early infant research phases. So if these ever come to fruition, this could be a decade from now. Don't forget, the length of the car project was really a decade long before they ended up killing it. Yeah. They did make a lot of headway in the last couple of years or so, I'd say. So I think this is pipe dream stuff, but certainly the market is interesting in what Apple's looking at and what it's exploring, and they're sort of planting a flag in the robotic space now.
Got to say, Mark, love my Roomba. Love that it cleans up the floors. I already talked to a digital home assistant. Like, this just feels like from somebody, I could see that if it really could do stuff, how people would adopt it. But I also wonder kind of about the cost of it and how expensive it would be.
I don't know. It could be anything. It could be $10,000. It could be $20,000, right? The robotics equipment to create a device that can be a human and act like a human, those things are going to be extraordinarily expensive. If the Apple headset's $3,500, the amount of technology that goes into this could be tens of thousands of dollars. Now, the thing to note here, this is basically a semi-diluted version of the engine they were working on for the car. If you think about it, a self-driving car is the ultimate robot. This would be a robot that's not going to be on city streets. This is going to be a robot that's going to be in your home. And if you think about it, repurposing that technology at much lower stakes makes sense. Profit margins are different in the home versus on the road. The safety, more importantly, is very different. You're not at risk of this so-called robot running someone over or getting you killed. You're at risk of the robot running into your new chair and damaging maybe the bottom of your chair or a new couch or something.
The dogs have, the dogs have to be a little careful, and the cats.
Maybe, Mark, until it starts throwing plates at you and it gets frustrated. Hey, Mark, the backdrop of this, though, of course, is looking for the next big revenue generator for Apple. And you write about this, and you write about the different products and how much revenue they've brought in based on the year that they were introduced. So talk a little bit about how Apple is looking for something to essentially augment revenue from the iPhone as iPhone sales slow down and people upgrade slower.
You know, I would say that Apple really only has one ecosystem today. It's the iPhone. Everything is built around the iPhone. I would argue even the Mac and the iPad are part of the iPhone universe, right? You probably own a Mac and an iPad or a Vision Pro or whatnot because you own an iPhone. You can take out the word probably for the Apple Watch and AirPods because those really only work with the iPhone. So it's 100%. If you own an Apple Watch or an AirPods, it's because you own an iPhone. All these Apple services that exist, Apple Music, Fitness Plus, Arcade, etc., it's because you own an iPhone. What they need to do is create subsequent ecosystems, new ecosystems. They don't have one other than the iPhone, so they need to find that. The car would have been that. It's unclear what else could create its own ecosystem other than a car. And robots in the home could be the closest thing. And so that's why it's a particularly interesting area.
Hey, Mark, just 30 seconds here. How much of this is kind of part of their focus, another focus at the company, which is artificial intelligence? This kind of, folds into this and plays into this a little bit?
Well, if you think about it, a robot is the ultimate expression in terms of hardware of artificial intelligence. A robot is an AI-powered device. A self-driving car would be an AI-powered device. So if this comes to market, whether it's the tabletop device sooner or a personal robot 15 years from now, those are AI devices, and those would essentially be the first from Apple.
Bottom line, though, it may never happen. 10 seconds.
Bottom line, it may never happen, but it's interesting that they're looking at it. And I will say, I do think maybe the personal robot may not happen, but there will be an Apple robotic-based device happen in the next 5 to 10 years for sure.
All right. Well, cool stuff as always. Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent Mark Gurman on his exclusive. You can read more. Just head to the Bloomberg Terminal or Bloomberg.com. Hey, coming up, the pair of finance veterans that bought Hertz and went all in on electric and got almost everything wrong. That's next.
The way I think about culture is they call organizations superorganisms. It's a collection of people, but the collection is greater than the individuals combined. So 1 + 1 is not 2. Ideally, it's 3 and greater. So if you were to look at a single person, a person has a set of core values. They may have dreams and aspirations. If you kind of map that to an organization, you can also think of the culture as your core values. Personal core values turn into corporate core values. Your organization's strengths and weaknesses. All those things collectively combined is something that we kind of put a label on it called a culture. A culture is like a muscle memory. It's very hard to change a habit. It's very hard to just say, hey, today we're going to define our culture as XYZ. We're just going to change this way. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's a collection of people's habits. That's like, again, like a super organism. So you have to like really nudge and create an iterative feedback loop. It's a slowly evolving thing. So that's why it's so critical. Like your day-to-day decision-making, day-to-day operation, everyday execution is really dictated by the culture of your organization, not by a couple of like checklists. It's not what you write on the wall. It's what you do and live and breathe every day. And that is the culture.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg, and we begin with a developing story. No Labels is going to abandon its 2024 presidential campaign effort. That, according to the Wall Street Journal, the headline right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service, worth repeating, No Labels is going to be abandoning its 2024 presidential campaign effort. S&P 500 index just turning negative in the past couple of minutes. Right now, giving up earlier gains, down 1 point to 52.09, a drop there of less than 0.1%. We've got the Dow down 128 now, also giving up earlier gains, down 0.3%. The Nasdaq Composite Index pushing higher, up by 39 points. For Nasdaq, that is an advance right now of 0.2%. Traders, though, are wading through Fed speak as they await tomorrow morning's jobs report. 10-year yield 4.33%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.68%. Spot gold down less than 0.1% right now. The gold is at $22.98 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 0.8%, 86.13 a barrel, while Bitcoin is up 4.9% right now. Bitcoin at 68,954 on Bitcoin. Ford is delaying the rollout of an electric 3-row sport utility vehicle by 2 years, extending the layoff of 2,700 workers in Canada who were set to begin building it in 2025. Ford shares, they're down 1.2%. Among EV makers, Tesla up by 3.5%. Recapping, S&P now flat on the day. We've got the Dow down 0.3%, Nasdaq up 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Well, perhaps one day it'll be a great case study at a business school about a well-known brand, Hertz Global, the rental car giant that's gone through a few iterations in its corporate lifetime, including a proxy battle by none other than Carl Icahn, a bankruptcy, a lifeline to turn around, another run at being a public company, only to, in the end, have it not quite work out as planned.
Yeah, big reason why, massive bet on a bunch of Teslas. This story is today's Bloomberg Big Take, and among our most read on the Bloomberg. With more, Bloomberg New Economy editorial director Eric Schatzker, who wrote the story along with Bloomberg's David Welch. Eric here in studio. Eric, great story,
Hi,
great
Carol.
read.
Hi, Tim.
Good to have you here. It is a tale of a company, and I just want to throw some stuff out at you. You buy a company out of bankruptcy with an improved balance sheet. You line up Tom Brady to be your celebrity frontman. You bring on a CEO from Goldman Sachs, do an IPO that goes for more than twice what you paid for out of bankruptcy. Sounds pretty darn good. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Exactly.
A lot did?
Well, in some respects, it didn't have to go wrong. When they bought Hertz out of bankruptcy, we were just coming out of the pandemic, and demand for rental cars was booming. So if you take booming demand for rental cars and add Stephen Scherr, the former CFO from Goldman Sachs, it might have been a wonderful turnaround story right there.
Yeah.
Except they went into it with much, much bigger ambitions. The two guys who led the buyout from bankruptcy, Tom Wagner on the one hand, Greg O'Hara on the other hand, hedge fund manager, private equity manager.
Wall Street pedigree.
In both cases, an excellent Wall Street pedigree. Tom Wagner came out of Goldman Sachs. Greg O'Hara came out of JP Morgan. They thought, perhaps with no small amount of ambitiousness, that they could take an archaic industry and transform it. Remember what things were like back in 2021. We were still in the midst of massive supply chain shortages. It was almost impossible to get a new car, let alone a Tesla. Elon Musk was the subject of universal adoration and fascination. Everybody loved the idea of sustainability. ESG wasn't a four-letter word yet. So this plan that they came up with to electrify the rental car industry resonated so beautifully with so many people and seemed like such a great idea.
And yet.
So, okay, a great idea, but perhaps not when you consider the difficulty of charging, not when you consider the cost of repairs for EVs, not when you consider that people who get off an airplane might not want to get into an EV for a road trip. Talk to us about the challenges that they soon discovered in trying to electrify this fleet.
Yes, they certainly overestimated the amount of demand there would be for EVs. Remember, at the time, the only thing to compare this to was the experience of Tesla owners. And Tesla owners, for the most part, love their Teslas. However, they don't go to the Tesla dealer, buy a Model S or a Model 3 or a Model Y or a Model X, and then subsequently drive 250 miles having never tried out an EV before. No, they go gingerly. It's much different when you get off a red-eye flight, you rock up to the Hertz counter, they tell you, I'm sorry, the GM whatever that you ordered is unavailable, and we're gonna give you a Tesla. Like, a Tesla? Where the hell? How do I charge this? Where do I charge this?
How do I open it?
Number one. And so people suffering from, for the most part, range anxiety and just fear of the unknown didn't line up to rent Teslas the way they thought they would. That fascination level just didn't extend to the rental business. The second problem that they encountered was, as you mentioned, damage. In part because renters were so unfamiliar with the way that Teslas in particular, but other EVs as well, perform, drive. They accelerate very quickly. They brake instantaneously. They got into accidents. In fact, the Tesla fleet got into accidents 4 times as frequently as the rest of the Hertz fleet. And repairing a Tesla is very expensive. They actually got that part right. Wagner and O'Hara had modeled the expense of repairing a Tesla. What they hadn't modeled was the accident incidence rate. And so the Tesla fleet became very, very, very expensive to maintain, and those cars were out of service frequently because if you are a Tesla owner, you know that you're prisoner to the company's repair schedule because unlike GM and Ford and Volkswagen, there is no big dealer network to support you.
Did they model Hertz customers becoming prisoners or getting arrested?
Oh boy, that was actually, to be fair to these guys, that is a legacy issue that predates the purchase out of bankruptcy. Hertz's information technology systems have been so bad for so long that the computers effectively make terrible errors, like not registering that somebody had returned a car. And then the company would turn around and ask a local police force to issue an arrest warrant for said customer. And this happened hundreds and hundreds of times, such that Hertz eventually, under its new ownership, had to pay out, I think, $168 million to settle 324 claims of false arrest.
Right.
Imagine if that were you.
No, it'd be horrifying.
One thing that's also changed in recent years, Eric, as you alluded to right at the top, is the difference in demand for EVs in general right now. And I want to remind everyone, a couple of years ago, you broke the news that Tesla and Hertz were teaming up. And that propelled, I believe, Tesla to a market cap of over $1 trillion.
For the first time, that's
ever.
right.
A lot has changed since then.
Sure.
In terms of global demand for EVs, U.S. demand for EVs. And right as Hertz is trying to sort of unwind this bet, there are also a lot of less expensive EVs out there available as well.
Sure. The reason that Tesla went to over $1 trillion on the strength of that story is that, and indisputably, because the stock went up 13% that day. I mean, it was an unbelievable day for Tesla because investors looked at that situation and sort of extrapolated into the future thinking, oh my goodness, if Hertz is going to buy 100,000 Teslas, well, what's the next order from Hertz going to look like? And surely Avis and Enterprise and Sixt and Europe Car, they must all be lining up behind Hertz. Didn't happen. And in part because of what we've discussed, the early adopters, the people who are all over EVs, already own those cars. And it's now the rest of us who are trying to decide, am I going to buy or lease another gas guzzler, or am I ready for the EV experiment? The charging infrastructure just isn't there for some people. They don't have convenient access to a charger. And yes, in the case of Tesla, there's a lot of competition now. It didn't exist in 2021. It does today. That's why Elon Musk cut Tesla prices by about 30% over the course of 2023, causing yet more insult and injury to Hertz because it blew a hole in their balance sheet. And we seem to have hit that plateau in the EV adoption curve where there is still sales growth, but at a much lower level than there was over the past few years. It's not a hockey stick any longer. And so Hertz, perhaps correctly, is beginning to reverse course and sell off some of its Tesla fleet principally, clearly for low prices because there is so much competition. But they're, Stephen Scher, the now former CEO of Hertz, with his Goldman risk management training would say, and has internally said, it is time to get out of a bad trade.
Is anything working for the company right now? Because I'm thinking about, okay, what's next now?
It's an excellent question, and I think we have to ask it and answer it to be fair, because not everything these guys did at Hertz turned out so poorly. They struck an exclusive or then exclusive partnership to rent EVs to Uber drivers. And while some Uber drivers weren't as good about making those regular payments as they should have been, on the whole, it has been a raging success. More than 1 billion miles have been driven by Uber drivers on Hertz EVs. That continues, and they have a partnership with Carvana. This is the company people may be familiar with because of their vehicular vending machines, right? Life-sized, like sort of little towers.
Still never seen one of those, by the way.
Best video ever.
Still never seen one.
No, they exist. I've seen one in Philadelphia. I haven't seen one here in New York, but they do exist. Carvana operates an online retail network for used cars. The idea behind that partnership was that if they partnered with Carvana as opposed to dealing with wholesalers or dealing with dealers, they wouldn't be, Hertz that is, wouldn't be forced to give up so many discounts on its used cars. That has in fact borne out, and Carvana is a very productive partnership.
And they still have Tom Brady. He's still around.
Tom Brady is still a pitchman for Hertz. The 7-time Super Bowl winning champion is out there pitching EVs, however. The first commercials had Tom Brady pitching Teslas, and for the reasons we've discussed right here, they have pivoted away from making it all about the Tesla.
The business case story still being written.
That's right.
It feels like. Very, very interesting. Great story. And you listen to, actually, the Bloomberg Big Take.
Yeah, the Big Take
podcast.
Listen. A great listen. I encourage everyone to check it out. You can get it anywhere you get your podcast, including Apple and Spotify.
Thank you so much, always.
It's a pleasure.
Bloomberg New Economy editorial director Eric Schatzker. You can read Eric's story and more from the Bloomberg Big Take on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com/Big Take. Hey, coming up, we're going to check in on the deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly, their guest, Redbird Capital founder and managing partner Jerry Cardinal.
Seeing a little turn lower in the S&P 500 and equities in general. The S&P now down 0.5 percentage point, while the NASDAQ composite down 0.3%. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. President Biden spoke by phone today to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a phone call that lasted about a half hour. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is at NATO headquarters.
He underscored as well that an immediate ceasefire is essential to stabilize and improve the humanitarian situation and protect innocent civilians, and he urged Prime Minister Netanyahu to empower his negotiators to conclude a deal without delay to bring the hostages home.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Meanwhile, navigational signals have been scrambled over the Tel Aviv area. Israel is bracing for a retaliatory Iranian attack following its raid on the Iranian embassy in Iraq. Israel's economy minister Nir Barkat tells Bloomberg Israelis remain traumatized by the Hamas invasion.
There's consensus in Israel. The war will not be over until we eradicate all of Hamas. Sitting in Rafah, 1/4 of Hamas, We will fight evil until they surrender. There's no other choice, and time is not on our side.
Barkat also accuses Qatar of backing Hamas, claiming the country is untrustworthy as a Middle East mediator. No Labels is dropping out of the 2024 presidential race. The Wall Street Journal reports the group, which aimed to field a third-party presidential bid, is abandoning efforts to create a unity ticket this election season. The decision comes after the death of its founding chair, former Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street from Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. We do check markets all day long. Stocks lower across the board right now. Red on the screen. Those earlier gains have completely fizzled. Red across the board right now. S&P down 19. That is a drop there of just about 0.4%. The Dow lower by 280 points, down 0.7%. Nasdaq Composite Index down 31, drop there of 0.2%. 10-year at 4.33%. The 2 years yielding 4.67%. Spot gold now down by $1 the ounce to $22.98, a drop of just under 0.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil 86.77 a barrel, up 1.6%. Brent breaking through 90 at $90.84 a barrel of Brent crude, up by 1.7%. Keep in mind that at the best level of the day, the S&P 500 index had been up by 1%. It is now down by about 0.4%. Boeing 737 MAX crisis has worsened an airline shortage of popular narrow-body aircraft, sending the cost of used jet rentals to the highest level in years. The plane maker has been slowing production of its best-selling model to address quality lapses tied to a near disaster on a 737 MAX 9 in January. Boeing shares, they are up right now by about 0.1%. Again, recapping, stocks lower, red on the screen with the S&P down 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much for the update. Well, check it out, folks. Episode 6 of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly dropping tonight. It features Redbird Capital founder and managing partner Jerry Cardinal, and it airs, Tim, this evening at 9 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Originals. You can also catch it Friday at 7 p.m. on Bloomberg TV, and then the podcast, it's already available for download at Bloomberg.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got with us Bloomberg Original Chief Correspondent Jason Kelly here in our studio. So, Jason, the latest episode with Jerry, why did you want to speak to Jerry?
So he's a fascinating character. I mean, he almost has this like Zelig-like path through. That's an old style Woody Allen reference.
Google it, everybody, if you don't know what it means.
Z-E-L-I-G. This just amazing. I mean, one could say even Forrest Gump. But, just he pops up at all these amazing moments in Wall Street and sports history. He's a Goldman alum, but all of these inflection points in the sports world, whether it's New York Yankees winning the World Series in 2009, the creation of the Yes Network, the resuscitation of the XFL, AC Milan now owning it. He's just in the middle of it. And he and Alex Rodriguez, my co-host, they go back a long ways. I knew Jerry a little bit as a deal maker. And so we wanted to kind of get inside his head.
Well, he also pops out, right? If you're Alex Rodriguez, like maybe you want to map out like an all-star team.
Yes.
I love this story.
Yeah, no, it was incredible to hear about this dinner that they had. And it was funny, this is a little behind the scenes of the deal. Alex and I were prepping the night before this interview at his house. We're having dinner, and he was like, I'm going to tell you this great story tomorrow that I don't want to ruin about like a time that Jerry and I had dinner. And sure enough, he rolled it out. And it was basically the two of them at the Core Club in Manhattan with Randy Levine, the president of the New York Yankees, still the president of the New York Yankees. And they wanted to figure out how to put together the team that would win the World Series. And they did.
Love that. So he knows how to do deals.
He does.
Okay, speaking of deals, what would you say is the one deal that really put him on the map or that will be his legacy?
So it's a great question. I mean, I think certainly at the moment it's AC Milan. And that's because this is his first big swing at global sports ownership where he and Redbird are the guys, the sort of the people at the top of it. And, Redbird is a part owner of Fenway Sports Group, which owns the Red Sox and Liverpool and the Pittsburgh Penguins, and among other things. And that gave him a taste of this, but I think AC Milan is it's a whole new world. You're competing against sovereign wealth. You're competing against, the titans of European football on the pitch and off the pitch. Obviously, there's a lot to do. So I think that's the big one for now. But I got to tell you, I mean, even since we talked to him last fall to tape for this, they've been involved in bidding for the Telegraph. They are in business with Skydance, which obviously is in the news today as it relates to Paramount. He's, partnered with Jeff Zucker, who was involved in the Telegraph deal, former CNN. He collects talent. He collects deals. He's globally minded, and he's in business with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, of all people. So it's a fascinating space to watch. And he says, in the context of the interview, that he kind of happened into it when he was at Goldman, and even he could not have predicted where this was going to go in terms of this megalith that sports has become.
What did you want to know in terms of his deal process thinking, or thought about like what deals he does or what kind of shapes them? Because we have a little bit of the sound we want to play, but like, what did you want to know about that?
I sort of wanted to know how he picks and chooses, and I think there's a little bit of, there's obviously more than a little science to it, but there's art as well.
All right, let's listen up to what Jerry Cardinal had to say to Alex and Jason.
And so I guess I had a very philosophical moment where I said, what gets me up in the morning? What do I love? And I love playing shadow entrepreneur, and I like solving problems with capital. And it just so happens, luck in people's career. I happen to hit an inflection point with sports that I couldn't possibly have seen coming. Back in 2001, right? You look back on the last 20 years, and you're like, wow, luck's great. You really hit an air pocket that where you took off. Now the challenge is navigating that, because now everybody's discovered sports. Yeah, sports is now an asset class. That scares me when I start to hear about things like sports being an asset class. My initial reaction is to run in the other way. And so but I say, look, you can't make money if you don't put money to work.
So yeah, fun little chat. Just some guys talking about deals in Miami.
Some guys. But that's interesting that he wants to run the other way when he hears sports discussed as an asset class.
Yeah, fascinating, right?
Because that's what why does that worry him? That's you see you see bigger deals for sports teams each and every month.
Because I think when you think about sports as an asset class, there is a commoditization that comes into play, and you worry about, quote unquote, dumb money coming in. One of the favorite phrases, we sort of write these things down among our team when guests say especially interesting things. And my favorite thing he says in this episode that Jerry says is he's looking to arbitrage incompetence, which is incredible.
Right,
I said that to Alex Steele earlier, and she was like, we should make a list of people who need to be arbitraged.
Yes,
so,
and print up T-shirts.
Exactly, but yeah, but that is, I think that's what he worries about.
Yeah, no, you do wonder. Listen, we always talk about this, right? When so much money comes into any area, like what's the distortion? How does it kind of get impacted negatively or positively?
Well, and there are big questions around valuations right now in the sports world. In a world where the Washington Commanders are selling for $6 billion and people are like, yeah, it's a pretty good deal. Versus these are franchises that, if you look back to what the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles, which were bought around the same time in the late 80s, early 90s, it's like a couple $100 million, and people are like, that's outrageous. How could they, how could somebody spend that sort of money?
Here we are.
And here we are.
Okay, before we let you go, Jason, brackets for a cause. It's no longer March anymore, but we're still doing March Madness.
Yeah.
Give us an update.
So this, of course, as you guys know, this is our almost $1.2 million annual contest, men's bracket, women's bracket. We get some of the biggest names in business, finance, sports. So here's who we're looking at going into the Final Four weekend. Starting with the women, Don Cornwell. He and Peter Weinberg are tied for first. And what's interesting, Don has South Carolina, Peter has UConn. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Javier Rodriguez, who's the CEO of DaVita. Notably, he is the only one across both brackets who had a perfect Final Four, so good for him. On the men's side, Whitney Wolfe Herd, who is the Bumble founder and executive chair. She came in second a couple years ago. She has a very, very good shot to win it all on the men's side this year. And our buddy, Joe Reese, is in second place.
Really sweet guy. Really nice.
So it's going to be fun.
God, really interesting. There's a little bit of movement around.
Yes, there's going to be some movement, and I think especially on the women's side, you really need to watch it because we have Iowa in the mix, Connecticut, and others.
All right, Jason Kelly, great stuff. The Deal with Alex Rodriguez, Jason Kelly this evening, 9 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Originals. Catch it Friday at 7 p.m. on Bloomberg TV, and the podcast already out. Coming up, one more thing.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet, just getting word that CVS Health will cover the over-the-counter oral birth control pill in the U.S., a step that further removes barriers to obtaining oral contraception as reproductive rights increasingly come under fire. CVS shares, they are trading lower right now. We got CVS down by about 0.4%. Ford is delaying the rollout of an electric three-row sport utility vehicle by 2 years, extending the layoff of 2,700 workers in Canada who were set to begin building it in 2025. The automaker says it is retiming the big SUV EV to debut in 2027 to allow for the consumer market for the three-row EVs to further develop. Ford shares down 2.3%. Tesla today up by 2.4%. A prominent proxy advisory firm is telling shareholders to vote against Goldman Sachs' executive pay plan after the Wall Street Giants' top leaders were given lofty raises in a year when profits slumped. Glass Lewis, a major voice on annual shareholder votes, cited the significant disconnect between pay and performance at New York-based Goldman in making its recommendation. Goldman Sachs today down 1.1%. Levi Strauss shares are jumping after cost-cutting measures boosted profitability, and a bet on baggy jeans and denim skirts drove higher than expected sales. The retailer, which did announce a cost-cutting plan and productivity plan back in January, said those measures are now paying off. Shares of Levi Strauss, they are rallying today by 14.2%. Revenue, by the way, at Levi did outpace expectations. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pelletan. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Hey, it's Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. For that, we go to Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 Newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim. President Biden spoke by phone today to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a phone call that lasted about a half hour. Secretary of State Antony Blinken commented on it at NATO headquarters.
He underscored as well that an immediate ceasefire is essential to stabilize and improve the humanitarian situation and protect innocent civilians, and he urged Prime Minister Netanyahu to empower his negotiators to conclude a deal without delay to bring the hostages home.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken. President Biden has told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that any future U.S. support for the Gaza war depends on new steps to protect civilians and aid workers. Israel's Minister of Economy and Industry, Nir Barkat, says he regrets the aid workers' deaths, but friendly fire incidents are inevitable. He says the group that's intentionally killing people in Gaza is Hamas.
Similar to the way that Nazis were eliminated in the Second World War, we cannot leave 1/4 of the Nazis in Rafah. We have to make sure that we eliminate them off the face of the earth. And that is the challenge we all have. And we are all united, all of Israelis are united in completing that war and eliminating Hamas off the face of the earth.
Israel Economy Minister Nir Barkat was a guest on Bloomberg Surveillance. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris and this is Bloomberg. And now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol and Tim.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Let's get to our one more thing this hour. We've got a great story about the fried chicken chain that's cutting workers' steps by 9,000 a day. It's a lot of steps. We all know we keep track of our steps. And it's all about saving some money.
I was shocked at how much they're walking and how many steps they're taking a day. Okay, so we're talking about Pollo Campero. It's a Guatemalan chicken chain. They have stores here, a lot of them here in New York. They have some in Rhode Island. They have some in New Jersey. They're mapping how workers were moving around stores. They revamped its restaurant design to allow people to work more efficiently. It slashed the number of steps taken by staff, who ensures that orders are delivered promptly and accurately, from about 18,000 per shift. That's about 3.4 miles.
That's a lot.
Down to 9,500. All this, of course, saves time. And you know what they say, Carol? Time is money.
Time is money. What's really interesting is I remember doing a deep dive with the folks over at UPS, and I actually followed a UPS driver on his routes for a day and just to get a feel of it. And, you know, they are so into data and tracking information to make sure everything's done efficiently. And part of it was with driving, trying to find the most efficient routes, but that meant taking more right-hand turns rather than left so that you don't get stuck, you know, at lights or getting stuck trying to wait for the traffic to pass. So, like, this is kind of a similar idea.
There's a Zoolander joke in here somewhere. I'm not going to figure it out.
Oh, please find it.
So The thing about this is it comes at a time when, of course, labor costs have gone up, not just around the country, but specifically in California, where minimum wage this week went up for employees who work in fast food, up from $14 an hour, or from $16 an hour rather, all the way up to $20 an hour, 25% increase. So companies there are trying to figure out, okay, where can we save costs if our labor costs are going up that much?
And I'm just going to say the median base wage for restaurant workers was about 18% higher in March than 3 years ago. This is according to some payroll data from establishments that use technology by Square. So, yeah, counting your steps. Last time I did, I think like over 20 or something. I think I spent a day at like Disney World or something.
Yeah,
a lot of steps.
It's tough. I mean, I think it's tough for a lot of people to get over 10,000 steps a day, but to hit 18,000 just at work,
yeah, it's a lot.
That is a tiring job.
All right, everybody, check it out. There's more. You can find it on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com. For those of you watching on television, up next is The Close. For those of you staying with us.